Thank you. Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the regular meeting for the April board. It is April 17th, 2024, and I'd like to call this meeting to order. At this time, I'd ask all those who are able to please stand, and we will do the land acknowledgement. This evening, I'll be doing it in French. I've been alternating at our monthly board meetings. So the one in March was in English, so this time it will be in French. Nous reconnaissons que nous sommes accueillis sur les terres des Mississauga, des Anishinaabe, de la Confédération Haudenosaunee et du Wendat. Nous voulons également reconnaître la pérennité de la présence des Premières Nations, des Métis et des Inuits, Miigwech. We can remain standing, I believe. Are we doing the national anthem now? Oh, sorry. Thank you. So I would just like everybody to stay standing. We have a special Canada tonight, and it is performed, this is very exciting, by kindergarten students from Wexford Public School in elementary teacher Sarabjit Kaur's class. And I have been privy to this. It was at the opening of Sikh Heritage Month, and it is adorable. So be prepared. It is really terrific. So without further ado, the kids.
We are kids from kindergarten. We're from Wexford Public School. Sikh Heritage Month is proudly recognized at the Toronto District School Board during the month of April. This year's Sikh Heritage Month theme is Charthi Kala, which means a positive, uplifted state of mind. Oh, Canada, our home and native land, true patient love, and all us command. With glowing hearts we seek our eyes, the true North song and free. From far and wide, oh Canada, we stand on guard for thee. God keep our land glorious and free. Oh Canada, we stand on guard for thee. Oh Canada, we stand on guard for thee. The land acknowledging means to me is that we should be thankful for the land and the people before us, and we should respect and take good care of this land.
There's really nothing like a group of kindergarten children to lift your spirits. Oh my goodness. So this evening we have the pleasure of celebrating 2 Heritage Months. Okay, sorry about that. At this time, I would like to ask for a mover and a seconder of approval of the agenda. Thank you, Trustee Laskin and Vice Chair Shan. And I would just point out before we approve the agenda that there are a number of items in your blue folder that I wish to draw your attention to. We have reports from trustees appointed to external organizations and student trustees. The student trustee report has a lot in it, so take a good chance to read it at your leisure. We have a Toronto Public Health update, We have the Special Education Advisory Committee. There's a written submission from David Leposki, who's chair of our SEAC at TDSB, and he'll be speaking to us this evening as well. There's the list of matters to be decided without discussion. There's notice of a possible amendment to item number 15.1, that's 1.1, that's the Learning Opportunities Index Policy Review, Phase 3. And finally, there's item 15.54, which is student demographics and LOI, rankings in French immersion programs. There's a revised Appendix A that's in your blue folder. So I just wanted to make you aware of all of those items. And with that, we will look for approval of the agenda. So we have a mover and a seconder. All those in favor, we'll do this by show of hands, or say aye if you're online. Any opposed? Okay, not hearing any. So with that, we will move on in the agenda. So tonight we have the pleasure of celebrating 2 Heritage Months at the TDSB. This month we celebrate Sikh Heritage Month and Latin America Heritage Month. So to start off, I will turn it over to Vice Chair Shan and Trustee Williams, who will get us started by speaking about Sikh Heritage Month.
Thank you. So we have a slide presentation to accompany what we'll be presenting. So we're excited to recognize Sikh Heritage Month at the Toronto District School Board. The TDSB has recognized Sikh Heritage Month since 2016 and was the first school board in Canada to do so. Sikh Heritage Month is also recognized nationally across Canada.
Vaheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Vaheguru Ji Ki Fateh, Sat Sri Akal, those are greetings in the Sikh community. I was fortunate to be here in this room in 2016 to move the motion to have the Sikh Heritage Month recognized as the first school board in Canada, so delighted to be sharing some of the work that's happening this year. The theme for Sikh Heritage Month this year is Chadi Kala, which speaks to the positive and uplifted state of mind. According to Sikh beliefs, Chadi Kala is a state of mind that radiates positive energy, optimistic attitude, strong confidence, and virtuosity. With true beliefs in the supreme power of the Almighty and the oneness of humanity, this state of mind can pave a way for the well-being and happiness of all. To kick off Sikh Heritage Month, an information session was held for all our educators for further learning about Sikh heritage. The following week, a virtual event for all students, staff, and our TDSB community was held to celebrate the beginning of Sikh Heritage Month. Performances, hymn readings, and specific traditional musical instruments that continue to be studied by inspiring artists were part of the event. The complete video will be posted to the TDSB website of this event shortly for those who missed the celebration.
Thank you. So we're going to go to the poster challenge. A poster challenge was held inviting all TDSB students to enter an image to capture this year's theme of Chadi Kala, the positive and uplifting state of the mind. We are pleased to share with you the 4 winning images on the one poster. From Gracedale Public School, Lily and Tanisha, who are both in kindergarten, and Zara, a grade 5 student. And from Cordella Junior Public School, Emily, a grade 7 student. You can see the beautiful posters on the screen.
Next slide, please. Well, the Sikh Heritage Month Planning Committee has organized educational opportunities to celebrate the heritage throughout the month of April. Here are a few of them to share with you. Gurdeep Pandar, a Yukon-based Bhangra dance artist, addressed our TDSP students earlier last week by sharing his words on Chadi Kala and providing uplifting Bhangra dance lessons. And if you haven't had Bhangra dance lessons yet, please sign up for one. There should be one offered somewhere. It's pretty awesome. Slide 6 will share some information about a virtual presentation by Gurminder Banga, an award-winning photographer who empowers audiences to live a conscious life with more grounding and less anxiety, and it's being offered to our students from grade 1 to 12 on April 16th, so that's still to happen. Our presenter taught our students, that's happened actually. Our presenter taught our students techniques to feel gratitude in their heart, mean it with their mind, and believe it with their gut. Our last educational offering to our elementary students includes an author reader from Raki Merchandani, who will read her book, Hair Twins, on Monday, April 22nd, starting at 9:30 a.m. Please join us. So I just wanted to quickly thank the Sikh Heritage Month Planning Committee, Executive Officer Peter Singh, and others who worked hard to continuously put together all of these amazing programs.
As part of the celebrations, a 5-part podcast series on various topics related to further learning on the Sikh heritage are posted on the public TDSB website. Please take a moment to listen and learn. Additional resources are available from our TDSB professional library for all educators to use. Please follow us on our Twitter or X now, for daily quotes on Sikh Heritage Month. Twitter X it's at TDSB_SHM. So wishing everyone a wonderful Sikh Heritage Month. And that's our presentation. Thank you to the whole Sikh Heritage Month committee as well.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. What a wealth of amazing opportunities for learning for students and staff alike. So it's just great. During the month of April, we're also very proud to recognize Latin America Heritage Month. At this time, I would like to ask Trustee Didividis to provide remarks.
Thank you very much. Proud to stand this evening in recognition of Latin American History Month. As the only trustee elected from the Latin America diaspora this century, it's always a very proud moment for me to be able to come and speak about these things. Very proud. It's a privilege for me, as a matter of fact, to represent students and staff from the Latin America diaspora, and to be able to share some of the things I'm about to share with you today. As you recall, in January, trustees passed the motion to move the formal recognition of Latin American History Month from April to October each year. So this will be the last time we do this in April. This aligns with the federal government's designation, which declared the month of October of each year to celebrate this heritage across Canada through the Latin American Heritage Month Act. Lastly, I'm excited to share that I'm currently working with staff on a motion to bring forth soon the development of a Latin America task force. This task force will focus on working with our students to identify challenges faced in the educational system by students from the Latin America diaspora and address them in order to improve their academic success. The theme for Latin American History Month this year is Weaving Our Legacies, Return to Our Collective Path. Enlazar nuestros legados, volver a nuestro camino colectivo. This year, we focus on weaving individual and collective legacies of resistance, struggle, joy, love, and healing as people of the Latin America, Abiyala, Pachamama, and its diaspora, alongside a communal purpose of raising consciousness and moving towards reclaiming our whole authentic selves and a recommitment to reciprocal relations, solidarity, and actions towards a just world. A virtual launch was held in the first week of April. It's a celebration of Latin American heritage that included dance performances and student voice throughout the event. A special thank you to our chair and director for their participation and to the participating students and performers who brought the event to life. Next. Poster challenge was held inviting the TDSB students to enter an image to capture this year's theme of weaving our legacies, return to our collective path, enlazar nuestros legados, volver a nuestro camino colectivo. We're pleased to share with you the 4 winning students from each category. The winner for the kindergarten category is Arian, and they're from Gateway Public School. Congratulations. From grade 1 to 3, we have Nicole from Bryan Public School. In the grade 4 to 8 category, we have Aisel, Gateway Public School. And lastly, in the 9 to 12 category, we have Daniela, grade 10 from North Toronto. The Latin American History Month Planning Committee organized educational opportunities to celebrate the Latin American History Month heritage throughout the month of April. Here are a few that we'd like to share with you. As part of the celebration to mark Latin American History Month during the month of April, all TDSB students from grades kindergarten to grade 8 were invited to attend a virtual workshop with Ruben Benny Guerra from New Tradition Music, a Canadian musical artist and poet based in Toronto, who's been nominated from 2 Junior Awards, World Music Album of the Year in 2018, and the Global Music Album of the Year in 2022. We're happy to offer this workshop to our students this past Monday on April 15th. We're excited to offer a virtual author reading to our primary level students. Students have been invited to hear a live presentation from Leonarda Carranza in both English and Spanish on her book, Abuelita and Me. This will be taking place on Thursday, April 25th from 10:30 to 11:30. For educators who may be watching, please join with your class if you're available to do so. And finally, for our inspiring quotes for the Latin American History Month in English, French, and Spanish, please follow us on Twitter, also X, at TDSBLAHM. And thank you again to the organizing committee and all the volunteers for the tons and tons of work that they put together to give us all these events. And thank you, everyone here today.
Thank you. Again, so many great opportunities and terrific posters too. So this past week, we celebrated International Day of Pink, and that is all about promoting and fostering acceptance, inclusivity, and diversity by uniting against bullying, discrimination, and harassment, especially directed at 2S LGBTQ+ communities. I would now like to direct your attention to a video of our International Day of Pink event that took place in this boardroom last Wednesday on April 10th. I know many trustees were in attendance, and I thank Trustee King, who was kind enough to give remarks on behalf of the board.
Despite everything good in my life, being queer will always be a part of me. I don't think of it as being a massive deal, just like many other things in my life. I'm French, I'm Trini, I'm Canadian, I speak 2 languages. I like to watch nerdy movies like Star Wars. I do sports, and I'm gay. Those are things that are a part of me every day.
I work within the schools to support GSAs so that 2S LGBTQ+ kids and allies have a safe place to go where they can be supported as their authentic selves.
I never dreamed in my wildest dreams that this would happen, that kids would get to be who they want to be, whatever that is, however they conceive of themselves, that these bright young kids would get the opportunity to live a good life. And that's all we want for people, and that's all we've ever wanted.
I am brave, I am bruised, I am who I'm meant to be. This
At this time, I would ask those able to stand for memorials, please. Every month, we see all these names pass by, and it's hard not to reflect on how important all of these people were. Whether you knew them personally, they made impacts not just in their family and their friends, but in our school communities in such profound ways. And I just think it's important we all reflect on that, because they're not just names on a screen. Anyways, you may all be seated, and we will carry on with this evening's meeting. I will stay standing because we are now up at Chair's announcements. So good evening, everybody, and welcome to the April regular board meeting. And as always, I would like to start this evening with an update on our recent advocacy work since our last board meeting, and there has been an awful lot of it. Following our regular March meeting on March 6th, and then a special board meeting on April 4th, we have undertaken several advocacy initiatives resulting from board motions. Letters were sent out throughout the month of March and early April on topics including capital childcare projects, gaps in funding related to mathematics priority funding, establishing standards for reporting incidents of hate, racism, and bias in school boards, banning ads related to gambling, and the need for continuing and in fact increasing funding related to student safety in neighborhood improvement areas. Of those letters sent out so far, we have only heard one response so far, and this was from the Minister of Canadian Heritage regarding gambling ads. Following our special board meeting of April 4th, two more important advocacy letters went out this week. On Monday, I sent a letter to the Minister of Education regarding our request for an exemption from the provincial moratorium on school closures. This letter outlines our vision of modernizing our schools through consolidation while addressing the underutilization and under-enrollment challenges. Our communication to the ministry highlighted the unanimous decision made during our board meeting, emphasizing the essential need for this exemption to effectively address the limitations imposed by the moratorium. The letter outlined the adverse effects of the current policy, such as hindering our ability to provide comprehensive programming and creating financial pressures that impede our focus on student opportunities. In the letter, we stressed the unique position of the TDSB to embark on a strategic and innovative solution that would allow modernization through consolidation. We proposed a carefully considered approach, suggesting up to 4 school consolidation projects per year that could be applied for by detailed business cases and modernization plans. We also underscored the broader benefits of consolidation beyond mere closures, where the idea would be to use proceeds from consolidation to build new state-of-the-art facilities so that these become a win-win for everyone. It's about reshaping our educational landscape to enhance student experiences, ensure equity in program access for all TDSB students, and also improving overall operational efficiency. Can I ask them to be quiet? Thank you. To provide context and support for our request, we attached a primer comparing well-enrolled schools to under-enrolled secondary schools, showing clearly the breadth and depth of programming that can be attained in larger secondary sites compared to the very narrow and limited course offerings in underutilized and under-enrolled sites. This highlights the potential benefit of consolidation, certainly one of them. Additionally, we appended the secondary program review to report to showcase our strategic vision related to school modernization through consolidation. I encourage you all to please review the letter and the appendix on our public webpage. This is not about closing schools, but instead has the real potential to open opportunities for many students and their communities. Our second letter this week went out earlier today. I wrote to the Minister of Education on behalf of the board to outline several critical funding challenges faced by our board. With approximately 238,000 students and over 100,000 learners in adult and continuing education programs, we are Canada's largest and most diverse school board. As you know, despite operational cuts and efforts to find efficiencies, we continue to struggle with a significant structural deficit. First, I would like to take a moment to highlight 4 key areas that contribute to the deficit. First, there's the Canada Pension Plan and employment insurance. The increasing rates of these statutory benefits without corresponding funding increases have resulted in a $35.2 million underfunding in the 2024-2025 budget. Salary gapping. The gap between the centrally bargained teacher salaries and what the province funds has led to a $22.3 million shortfall in 2023-2024. We don't yet have the numbers for this year, but we expect them to be similarly high. The moratorium on school closures. The inability to consolidate underutilized schools due to a provincial moratorium has hindered cost reduction efforts and has been further exacerbated by the elimination of a $35 million grant that was meant for top-up to that. And finally, COVID expenditures. The TDSB incurred $70 million in pandemic-related costs not covered by the Ministry of Education. But we were directed at that time to spend that money from our reserves by the Ministry of Education and Toronto Public Health. In terms of the ministry asked us to listen to Toronto Public Health and to use our reserves. So that is money that has never been reimbursed to TDSB. The minister has made several public comments about how the TDSB has received additional funding since 2019. I'm sure many of you have heard this. But it's important to note that the bulk of this $130 million that he refers to, $128 million, $130 million, that has gone towards salary increases largely that were negotiated provincially. In addition, while per pupil funding has increased by 8.5%, this paints a far better and rosier picture than what has actually happened. If we consider that inflation has risen to 13.8% during that time, the per pupil funding has actually been reduced. I want to be clear that over the last many years, our board has been doing its part. Since 2019, the board has approved $64.7 million in reductions and efficiencies. And that doesn't even include the $17 million in additional reductions that we made earlier this month, or last month, I guess, for the 2024-2025 budget. And yet we still face a projected deficit of $26.5 million for the upcoming budget. While we now await the grants for student needs, it is more important than ever that the ministry work collaboratively with us to find a path forward that addresses the aging benchmarks, the underfunding, and the gaps in the GSNs. Much of these details are to be found in the letter I sent to the minister earlier today. In addition, I urgently requested the ministry address our structural deficit and adjust funding benchmarks to reflect the true cost of operations in Toronto. Furthermore, I called for a new deal, which is needed to ensure we can meet the diverse needs of our students and communities in the largest school board in Canada. The letter was really just one part of our overall advocacy on the budget. This afternoon, I was joined by many trustees, and I thank you for attending, as well as community members and parents to discuss our budget situation with the media and announce our upcoming budget town halls. I want to thank those who stood alongside me, as well as the community members who spoke so passionately and thoughtfully about their concerns and their experiences, including Katrina Matheson, Stephen Mensa, Jared Westrike, and Pablo Vivanco. I am looking forward to attending the 3 upcoming budget town halls in the next 2 weeks with my trustee colleagues, and I hope that many parents, caregivers, guardians, and community members and staff will join us to learn directly from all of us about the 2024-2025 budget and ask questions and share their voice and their feedback. Additional details about dates, times, and locations will be shared with the TDSB community very soon. I would like to close by reflecting on the fact that a thriving Ontario includes a thriving Toronto, and contributing to a Toronto that will be the economic engine of the province in 10 or 20 years' time is directly related to what we put into education today. I know it may seem as though the provincial government and our board, it may seem we are very far apart right now. But I am hopeful and I am open to finding creative ways to work with the Ministry of Education and other ministries to discuss the challenges faced by our board in further detail so that we can, together, find solutions that work for the students and our city. Thank you. We will now move on with this evening's agenda. Okay, at this time, we are going to move on to reports from trustees appointed to external organizations and student trustees. So before we do that, I just want to draw everyone's attention that we do have 6 trustees who sit as directors and associate directors for the Ontario Public School Boards Association. Those trustees who do so much work on behalf of all of us for OBSPA contribute tremendously, but their report goes to our Planning and Priorities Committee as opposed to the board. But I just want to recognize the contribution they make because they don't get recognized at board. And I know the work that they do is really invaluable on behalf of all of us and on behalf of all students in TDSB. So with that, we will move next to those who are reporting. I think we'll go first to trustees and then we'll go to the student trustees so we can end with student voice, which I know will be powerful. So I believe we have a report on public health from Trustee Shishkandaraja. So over to you, Trustee Shishkandaraja.
Thank you. So my update from public health is around the measles, cases of measles. I know there's been quite a bit of public concern with our parents around this issue. And so we were able to have a presentation of public health last time we met. And so I just wanted to provide a very short update. If you want more information or the longer presentation, feel free to search it up on the city site. But just, a few important things as it relates to us. Public health is encouraging people to get the measles vaccination. And even if you are unsure that you've had it or not, they're encouraging you to go out and get it, that there's no issues getting it again. So, if you're unsure and are not able to do that, they are encouraging people to get vaccinated. It can be very infectious. So one infected person can infect 9 out of 10 unvaccinated close contacts. So again, why they're encouraging vaccination. But to put it into a little bit of context, measles is still very uncommon in Toronto. I know there's been a lot of alarm, especially on social media amongst parents, and the numbers are still very low. And the risk of a measles outbreak tends to be more from international travel, as opposed to sort of, local Torontonians sort of, getting it from not being vaccinated. And it's also a concern or increasing concern at the moment because of the lower vaccination rates that happen due to the COVID-19 pandemic. There has been a rise in measles globally, including, of course, in Toronto. But just again, to kind of put those numbers in context, in 2023 in Toronto, there are 4 cases of measles and 1 in the year 2022. And the 5-year average before COVID was 5 cases each year. So it's still a very small number. I know there's a lot of worry, especially when there's articles that come out, which is, the public health's, duty to inform the public. But I do know with parents, it sort of sends alarm bells when they say, if you went to this library, you might have been in contact. But just to give some perspective. And in Toronto, the cases of measles so far have been strictly travel related. And more specifically to us, the Ontario Immunization of School Pupils Act requires that students be vaccinated against measles or have a valid exemption, and that these need to be reported to our local health unit. And so the Board of Public Health is working with school boards to get information out to students to ensure that they are up to date on their measles vaccinations. And they said that Toronto, or our school board, should be getting our letters either this month or next month. And the timeline right now is to give opportunities for parents to make sure their children are up to date on their measles vaccinations. And if not, in September, November period of this year, there will be, according to public health, I'd love to, hear what staff on our staff have to say about this. But public health indicated that they will be issuing suspension orders to non-compliant 7-year-olds in the TDSB. And from there, they will assess other cohorts to ensure that our students are up to date. And of course, the Board of Health is engaged in public awareness campaigns about the importance of the immunization for measles. So yes, thank you. That's all for me. And welcome any questions.
Trustee Williams, please go ahead.
Thank you so much for that update, Trustee Shishkanjaraja. At our Urban Indigenous Community Advisory Committee meeting yesterday, we did have a presentation from Toronto Public Health, and I was just wondering if at the city, in the meetings, they also discussed in more detail the immunization records, the process of getting those up to date. At the presentation last night, they gave some timelines where a first letter, a second letter would be going out to parents, and some consequences of not responding or non-compliance, including suspension. Would you be able to speak a little bit to those upcoming requirements and deadlines, if they were discussed?
Sure. Yes, thank you for that question. It's a great question. So they didn't go into very much detail about that. So I would love to know if Public Health has directly reached out to our staff at TDSB, because that's what they said they were going to do. They were going to be working with our staff. But the sort of skeleton outline that they did provide us was that this month and next month the letters will be going out. So I'm not sure from our staff side if those timelines are still happening. And they said from September to November of this year that the suspension orders will be going out. That seems to me, it might be a short time. I don't know if there's sort of, kind of, like you mentioned, a few steps in between to encourage immunization before we go to the suspension route, which to me seems like the more dire consequence. But when we met, the only dates that were discussed for our particular school board was the spring date of April and May, and then the fall date of September and November for suspension orders to non-compliant students. So yes, if staff have any updates, if I'm not sure, I understand they wouldn't perhaps be prepared for this, but maybe if they could provide an update at a later time, and if any conversation has been happening with the Toronto Board of Public Health.
Thank you very much. Through the chair, are you asking when the suspension notices will be issued?
Yeah, I'm asking if this timeline that they have suggested on their end is something that we are actually going to be able to and willing to carry out.
Thank you very much. Through the chair, we are obligated to carry out their timeline under the legislation. So we are accustomed to working with public health on their timelines, and staff are in regular communication with public health with respect to the issuing of suspension notices, and more importantly, ensuring that families are well aware of either how to ensure that their child is appropriately vaccinated, or to follow the other procedures so that it doesn't lead to a student being out of school.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Trustee, did that answer your question?
Thank you for that. So my follow-up question, based on the response, was around the communication, because I believe it would need to go out in multiple ways, considering the serious consequence of, a child's immunization record not being up to date. So I would love to hear, like, if there is already thought to a strategy, including the principal sending information directly to the parents, guardians, caregivers at a school, system-level communications, and communications being posted on the TDSB website. And for those folks that might need translation, because this is an important issue, I believe. So I'd really like to hear maybe a little bit more about, the undertaking to have that fulsome and multiple-pronged communication strategy.
Thank you very much. Through the chair, I know from my most recent meeting with Dr. Davila and her staff that they do have a phased approach to communication with families. I cannot recall all of the aspects of their communication plan, so staff will gather that information and ensure that it's included in Trustees Weekly.
Okay, thank you. I'm not seeing any further questions for you, Trustee Sriskandarajah, so thank you so much for that detailed report.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Okay, at this time, we're going to move on to student trustees. So the floor is yours.
Ani, everybody. My name is Ozawa, Ozawa Secord. I will be just doing a quick introduction. This will be our April report. And just for a fun treat, outside of a report, we just wanted to say April, for our April report, I wanted to share that April is Nabani Gizis, which means sucker moon in Ojibwe. And I just thought that'd be a fun way to kind of share our culture. It's been something I've been doing with some of my students, just, Ojibwe word of the day, and I thought that's something you guys could take back to your home or your schools, or, yeah. And I will pass it off to Yikai.
All right, thank you, Ozawa, for that. Our first item for this month is my student trustee. So myself and Near North District School Board student trustee Dora Chen have been spearheading Osta ACO's My Student Trustee project. So alongside Osta ACO's executives, we have drafted numerous resources, including a guide on writing and presenting motions, a summary of student trustee rights, and a manual for Robert's Rules of Orders. We hope this resource would help support student trustees in the future throughout their tenure and ensure their success. Yeah.
Thanks, Ikai. So also tying back into Asta ACO and their public cabinet, which Ikai has been a part of for majority of the term. I have recently had the privilege to be appointed on the Black Student Trustee Caucus Liaison position with the Asta ACO public cabinet and OPSA. So I know we talked about it a little bit with the chair, speaking about it and speaking about the wonderful work that you guys do there. So I have a privilege to really be able to represent Black student voices and the Black student trustees, not only in OSTA, but Black students in general within public education here in Ontario. I'll pass it back to Ozawa to continue.
Our third pillar for OSTA, for TREG's MMIW 2S education project, with collaborative efforts and consultation with the Cabinet for Truth and Reconciliation, or TREG. I shared potential format for addressing the Red Dress Day, or Missing Murdered Indigenous Women, Men, Two-Spirit, and People's Day on May 5th. Student Trustee Sigurd has been in contact with other members for an assembly format and a brief document, including the current data of what we know and what our educational curriculum has to offer, as well as respectful protocols for the future. And TREG hopes that this document can be updated and shared within OSTA for years to come. Again, it is a very important day for me and for a lot of people, and I hope to bring the best quality info that I can, and a lot of our members have contributed a lot, and I will pass it back to Ikai.
Right, thank you, Trustee Secord. Our next items are for Student Senate. So the Student Senate held a joint virtual learning center meeting on March 27th. The Student Senate facilitated updates and discussions on topics, including TDSB's budget process, the Know Your Worth scholarship, and menstrual equity. These learning centers allow us as student trustees to bring topics from the board to the students, and we're collecting some valuable student voice in that regards. The next item is the grades 9 and 10 leadership retreat. So the Student Senate will be hosting the grades 9 and 10 leadership retreat this Friday, April 19th to Sunday, April 21st. This overnight retreat will provide roughly 50 grades 9 and 10 students across the TDSB with the opportunity to step outside their comfort zones, foster their leadership skills, and bond with like-minded individuals. I had the privilege of hosting this leadership retreat last year as president, and it was a really great time to spend with students all across the board, just seeing them develop as student leaders, and we hope to do the same this year as well. I'll pass it back to Trustee Bell.
Thank you. So diving into our particular initiatives for this particular month. So I had the privilege to visit William Lyon Mackenzie in collaboration with local trustees and superintendents in Ward 5. William Lyon Mackenzie in particular is very special to me, as it's a school that I personally already attend. And this particular school, we were able to really dive into the multiple different pillars of the Student Perspective Report that I've been doing throughout my term. So it ties into, of course, just to recap, the idea of equity, inclusion, and diversity, opportunity outside of the classroom, diving into extracurricular involvement, student wellness and mental health, and then also focusing on other things as well. The final pillar has finally been kind of developed after this being the 13th school visit, over 600 students impacted directly through these particular reports. And that final pillar ties into current board events. So that dives into us being able to talk about different things such as social media, AI development in the classroom, and the cell phone ban / policy. Diving into further collaboration within the Student Perspective Report and those follow-ups, we wanted to make sure that we didn't only speak with students, but actually took their voices and did something with it. And that's exactly what I've tried my best to do. So based on the middle schools that we were able to visit, about 5 or 6 of them within those 13, I was able to understand that students truly wanted to learn more about leadership opportunities beyond the classroom and that particular pillar. So I took it upon myself to try my very best to connect students with those particular opportunities. So on the national level, I'm a national officer in Canada FBLA and Target Alpha, which are two of some of the largest of their kind nonprofits, completely youth-led and high school-led. So we have 2 middle school competitions targeted towards middle school students. With Canada FBLA, we made sure that middle school students within TDSB had equitable access to the free opportunity, along with Target Alpha, which we developed in a completely new competition, really rooted particularly within these Student Perspective Report visits, and understanding that middle school students truly want to have that opportunity. So we've been able to connect with multiple of those students schools again and conduct multiple different visits across different middle schools within the TDSB. So that's a lovely opportunity as well. Another thing in regards to our initiatives ties into Toronto Youth Council. So I think it was last board meeting or the board meeting before, I mentioned how I have the privilege to be able to lead within the Toronto Youth Cabinet in the position as Deputy Lead of Education. So we basically had our monthly meeting last month, and we talked about majority things dying into the municipal budget, and of course some of the motions that we were able to pass here on the board level with TYC and the Toronto Catholic School Board as well. So it's also an amazing opportunity there. All right.
Okay, and our next initiative, or for my section, which is Toronto Indigenous Youth Council. I attended our weekly meeting. We visit every Monday at the Urban Indigenous Education Center. I had a chance to have a short discussion about the role of the Indigenous trustee and how the role needs to be filled, and just had a short breakdown and discussion with other Indigenous students about how they would like to see the role continue if they are interested in the role. So hopefully I'll have an update next board. I also got a chance to talk about the project that I am curating with my educator there, my teacher. We are trying to share a collection of resources for my successor, and with a plan of a collaborative video of advice and words of encouragement that hopefully can be kind of like a video essay, just shared over and over with other trustees, hoping this role can further that role and impact. I also had a chance to share the progress with the students about the Owasiwa Wabung or Day After Tomorrow conference. This conference is held on May 1st and is fully student run. These students have shown a tremendous amount of leadership and creativity. I know this isn't something that a lot of them are used to, but it's something that shows great responsibility, and I'm very, very proud of them. Like, oh my God. Anyway, they do an amazing job, and yeah, I'll pass it. We'll go on to our next section for media and events. We had the Key Club dinner event. Student trustee Abel attended the Casaloma Key Club dinner on behalf of our student trustees. This event was a success where the students from various TDSB students shared their spectacular journeys with leadership and philanthropy.
Thanks, Ozawa. Let's dive into our last two items. I know it's kind of been a mouthful, but myself and my co-hosts have tried our very best to use the most of our terms and our positions. Now tying into media and events as well. So the Ontario Alliance of Black School Educators invited myself personally for an event to be able to speak with both students, educators, and parents to join them virtually on a panel. They had esteemed guests and educators and speakers to really talk about the dialogue of Black student experiences in the education system. I had the privilege to be the youngest on the panel, but also be able to really be speaking with them and having an open dialogue with them as well, which was a lovely experience. Another thing that's quite special, especially since I'm the vice chair, was very influential in being able to allow me to do this opportunity. The Racial Justice Summit event 2024 with the Urban Alliance on Racial Relations. I was a guest speaker at TMU. I believe it was yesterday or the day before. And I was able to have an open dialogue on professionals and advocates within dialogues in terms of racial justice. This particular topic is extremely, extremely important to me personally as a Black student and a Black woman as well, and those particular intersectionalities that tie into it. The conversation brought together educators and staff and professionals in person, and it was highly productive and well received. And just to end off, I just wanted to say that we had a lovely experience this particular month, and it really just builds up to the point that we're kind of close to the end of our terms, which basically means that we're almost out of here, or they're almost out of here, sadly. But that technically means that all the work that we kind of done accumulatively truly shows within our report, and we hope to do the same next month as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
So at this time, we're going to welcome David Lepofsky, who is the co-chair of SEAC. And just to provide information to those who are with us tonight, SEAC is a statutory committee of the board. That's the Special Education Advisory Committee. They provide advice to the board on and to to all of us on all things related to special education, and they have the ability to present directly to board. So we welcome Mr. Lipovsky, who will be here this evening and will be speaking to us. And just a reminder to trustees, there is something in your blue folder from Mr. Lipovsky.
Yeah, if it's possible to take that document out, and I tell you what it looks like, but I haven't a clue, other than it's a couple of pages. And if you could have it in front of you, because it'll help in our discussion. Thank you for the opportunity to speak to you. As the chair of the Special Education Advisory Committee, it's my mandate to bring to you advice on where the board needs to make changes to serve the needs of over 40,000 students with special education needs. The Toronto District School Board, I believe, has more students with special education needs than some school boards have students in total. It needs a dedicated focus that lives up to the powerful role model it will be to the rest of the country. I'm speaking to you on the 17th of April. Today is the 42nd anniversary of the day when the Canadian Charter of Rights went into effect. Now, that was a big day for everybody, but it was especially powerful for those of us living with disabilities, because the Charter is the first Western constitutional Bill of Rights to explicitly spell out a supreme or sovereign guarantee of equality to people with disabilities. It's not just important that it's there, but it's especially important because we had to fight to get it there. I was one of the people who took part in that campaign. I've written a memoir about it, which the title tells you all you need to know. I called it Swimming Up Niagara Falls. That's what the fight was like. 3 months or a couple of months from now will be the 42nd anniversary of the amendments to the Ontario Human Rights Code that for the first time made it illegal to discriminate because of disability and access to goods, services, and jobs. Services like education. That too was something we had to fight for. I took part in that fight. You have before you the multi-year strategic plan that staff are proposing that you approve. The piece of paper you have in front of you from SEAC asks you to make a modest amendment to it to live up to the rights we won 42 years ago. Now, I want to be clear, the multi-year strategic plan does make some commendable references to the needs of students with disabilities and other students with special education needs, and that's good, but it's not good enough. 40,000 plus kids deserve better. For example, it doesn't even use the word equality, and it does not even refer to the Charter of Rights or the Human Rights Code, whose rights we fought so hard for. And when we fought for them, education was one of the core areas we focused on back then. You'll see that the document does refer to the Education Act and the Accessibility for Ontarians with Disabilities Act, and that's great. But those two laws and the protections they extend to these students are the weakest of the four. The Charter and the Human Rights guarantee more, and by law, they are sovereign and paramount, and they're not even mentioned. 40,000+ kids deserve better. The document refers over and over to equity of access. Now, it sounds good. It doesn't mean anything. Equality is a term which is stronger and that we do know. And that word is not to be found anywhere when I did a word search, and I kept looking. The charter guarantees the right to the equal benefit of the law. That means the equal benefit of what this school board offers without discrimination on grounds because of disability. At least we could say that. Moreover, it uses terms that are good, like accessibility and removing and preventing barriers, but at times it doesn't link them to disability, and that's, unfortunately for some people, unless you say it, they don't get it. Believe me, I know. And it's not because anyone's bad or doesn't want to do well, but it is the reality. You got to say what you mean because you'll be taken to mean what you say. And finally, in the wording before you, or in the original, in the multi-year strategic plan that staff have proposed, there's terminology which kind of sounds good, but it's actually really weak. It says, let's more fully include universal design and learning. Well, if one more teacher does it, they've advanced the goal. It's more fully than before. 40,000 kids deserve better. So what do? I put before you a couple of options. There's wording up top, which is what SEAC passed, and what I urge you to adopt as an addition to the multi-year strategic plan. Now, I presented that to the Priority and Planning Committee, and a number of you who were there asked very good questions, and everyone spoke saying that they're supportive of the content. But then the committee went into closed session, which is your right, and then what it passed is the second thing you'll see on the page. What it passed was simply a recommendation that staff consider it when making an action plan. Well, number one, staff already considered it when we asked them to include it in the multi-year strategic plan, and they rejected it. Asking them to consider it, 40,000 kids deserve better. Moreover, if it's not in some way in the multi-year strategic plan, then the message is clear that this is kind of, well, we'll add it in later. Or we may. So what I've done is I'm urging you to adopt the language that we present, that the SEAC approved. But heck, I'm a lawyer. I try to think about solutions. So what I did was I crafted alternative wording later in the document, which is, in fairness, more diluted. But I've attempted to address the concerns that as best I understand them, as they've been conveyed to me by staff. And I'm going to summarize very quickly and then I'll wrap up. Now, I want to be clear, I've not had the opportunity, because literally this was developed in the past day, to do anything more than share this alternative wording with SEAC. I don't have a vote of their approval. The most I can do is tell you as the chair that our preference is that you adopt the wording we approved that's at the top of your page. But I will advise SEAC, and I will tell you that if that's not agreeable, the alternative wording that David Lepofsky's put before you, but SEAC has not yet approved, I will say it is a substantial improvement over the multi-year strategic plan as is. Staff told from what little, and they've got to speak for themselves. I can't speak for them. I'm just, and there's a huge risk of broken telephone. But concern that maybe the wording we used in our initial draft was too detailed for something at a high level of a multi-year strategic plan. My alternative wording is far more careful. There was concern about saying full benefit, that we shouldn't promise full benefit to the students with disabilities of what it offers, the board offers everyone else. Well, I don't see why we shouldn't. I think that's what they deserve. But so what did I do? I used, in the alternative wording, equal benefit. That's what the Constitution guarantees. It's the least thing we could say. Instead of equity of access, I suggest let's use equality of access. Instead of the wording that I'd prefer, that SEAC approved, which is, make as much progress as possible. Say, more diluted, work towards. So if there's anyone who's nervous about how much it's committing, the alternative wording is not as good as we'd like, but it is a significant improvement over what's there. And finally, please include the wording that you've seen or that I've suggested. If they're going to refer to the Education Act and the Disabilities Act, please refer to the Charter of Rights and the Human Rights Code. They prevail and they're stronger. The staff told us, or at least from what I gather, there's a concern about either the detail, tried to soften that, about creating expectations that are too much. Well, the only expectation that this wording addresses is what the Constitution guarantees. And the other concern I heard expressed was potentially that this language does not provide things that are kind of measurable. Well, if you read the rest of the multi-year strategic plan, there's almost nothing in there that is measurable. It's all very high-level wording. So is what we're offering. So one way or the other, please make it stronger. I welcome the opportunity to take your questions. A couple of you have already been invited and took up our invitation to come to our SEAC meeting. We're going to be inviting you in groups over the year because we'd love to have you not only see our discussions, but take part in our discussions. We'd love to have you there either in person or virtually. Anyway, thanks so much for the opportunity to present, and I welcome questions if there are any.
Thank you, Mr. Lepofsky. Trustee Rajagulasingham has a question to start us off.
Hi, Mr. Lepofsky. It's very nice to meet you. I made note of your memoir. I'm definitely going to take a read of that. I just had one question for you. In the past 6 years, I think we've all said equity, equity, equity over and over and over again. So I'm curious to hear if you can elaborate on why the preference for equality of access versus equity of access.
Equality, okay, there's a couple of reasons. First, you have to understand from a disability perspective especially, and this is not meant as a criticism of anyone here or elsewhere, but equity, diversity, and inclusion programs, which I passionately support, have too often been focused primarily on some equality-seeking groups who desperately need it and need more, but have tended either to leave disability out or to treat it as a sort of second or afterthought. And that's, I want to be clear, not against equity, diversity, inclusion. If anything, I'd like to see tons more. But when you use the term equity, I don't just mean the school board system, I mean in universities like where I teach, I mean in the government where I used to work, provincial government, I mean in lots of places, we tend to get left out. And equity for some is equity for none. The beauty of using the term equality is, for one thing, we know what it means. The Supreme Court has told us what it means. You've got a human rights office that are specialists in what it means. And it is what we are entitled to. The more ambiguous equity risks being less and risks, at least for some, leaving us out. I hope that helps.
Thank you so much.
Okay, I'm not seeing any further questions, so I thank you very much for your presentation this evening and for coming all the way to 50/50 to present to us, Mr. Lepofsky.
It's great to talk to you all, and we really look forward to collaborating with you. And just in closing, we're working on, this is the high-level discussion. I'm hoping I will be back to you later in the year with some very specific, high-impact, feasible recommendations on what the board could do. We are working with staff first to present our feedback and our suggestions, and I only intend to come to you if there are things that require your approval or don't get resolved short of that. But stay tuned. Thanks very much.
We will look forward to that, and I'm looking forward to my coming to the June meeting of SEAC. It's in my calendar.
Yep. Very good. Thanks.
Okay, so moving on with this evening's agenda. We are now at the Director's Leadership Report. So I will love to turn it over to Director Russell Rollins for her report.
Thank you very much. Through you, Chair. Good evening, students, staff, community members, and the Board of Trustees. To the student trustees, your leadership is a positive and inspiring and driving force in the TDSB. Thank you for your tremendous leadership and sharing with us what you do each month. This evening, my leadership report will include highlights on the Student Envision Conference, the Unleashing Learning professional learning opportunity, and 3 examples of student learning tied to Earth Month. I too had the opportunity to attend the board celebration of International Day of Pink. It was a little bit of a surprise to walk into this room and see it as a pink bubble, but it really was a joyous recognition of the importance of that day. It focused on creating safe and welcoming learning environments as the foundation for the success and achievement of our students, many of whom hold intersecting identities and lived experiences. TDSB also hosts a student conference entitled Envision to affirm the identities of 2S LGBTQIA+ students and provides a necessary affinity space and community building opportunities for them. Like all students, Two-Spirit and queer youth have the right to achieve, belong, and thrive in our schools. Those are 3 pillars of what will hopefully be our new multi-year strategic plan. Both the International Day of Pink and the Envision Conference motivate us as educators to listen deeply to their experiences and act upon improving their attendance, feelings of safety, mental health, and engagement, all of which is pivotal to their success in school. Thank you to all of the staff who contributed to the success of both of these events. This week, our IT team, led by Executive Officer Peter Singh, and many educators across the TDSB will be hosting the annual Unleashing Learning Conference for Educators. The conference focuses on student learning experiences aligned with TDSB's multi-year strategic plan. Attendees, over 800 attendees from across our TDSB, will have a choice of over 70 sessions provided by TDSB educators, principals and vice principals, and vendor partners. A few examples include instilling wonder and curiosity through STEM, Indigenous learning through Minecraft with Level Up Toronto, and we're fortunate to have our closing keynote on navigating learning in the age of AI from Katina Populkas from Dell Canada. Thank you to the corporate sponsors who made this opportunity not only possible in its design, but financially possible for our educators. There's something special if you have the opportunity to attend. There's a digital marketplace that's a venue for sharing classroom practice among educators. It's an energizing opportunity to learn from and meet new colleagues for our staff. If you attend, you'll hear my opening talk with educators from schools across the TDSB focused on navigating digital transformation, sharing some examples of appropriate use of AI in classrooms, and seeking their thoughts on screen time and managing cell phone usage. I'm sure they won't hesitate to tell me what they're thinking. So thank you to everyone who has made this learning opportunity possible, and I want to again acknowledge the generosity of our corporate sponsors. Finally, I'm delighted to share a few highlights of the many ways our students are contributing to a more sustainable world in commemoration of Earth Month. I would like to commend the Island Public Natural Science School on their ongoing commitment to sustainability and student learning by transforming unused spaces into raised bed gardens, an Indigenous medicine garden, and vertical garden towers. This initiative was made possible through the Island Public and Natural Science School's collaborative partnerships with members of their school community, particularly the TD Friends of the Environment Foundation, Ports Toronto, and Newport Aviation. Their generous support has enabled the school to expand their garden projects this season and provide opportunities for students both in and out of the classroom. Last year, one of Dr. Norman Bethune CI's most impactful initiatives was a week-long clothing and textile drive to help divert textile waste from landfills. Students researched and selected a reliable organization for donation to ensure that the items would be able to help those in need. Bethune's 2023 clothing and textile drive was a huge success, with 57.75 kilograms of textiles donated and, most importantly, diverted from landfills thanks to this campaign. I'm incredibly proud of the contributions of our students and their support for communities. They've learned about respecting environmental stewardship and how one person and one community can make a change. And lastly, to develop Woburn Junior Public Schools Eco Code for 23-24, students and staff built an eco quilt using fabric scraps from a garment factory. An eco code is a school's environmental policy or mission statement that demonstrates its commitment to climate action and reaffirms our students' role as important members of their school communities. It's critical that our students continue to engage in ongoing learning about the impacts of climate change and are given opportunities, as I have shared this evening, to partake in action to help ensure a better future for us all. Thank you. This concludes my leadership report this evening.
Thank you so much, Director Russell Rollins. So many exciting things happening in our system. So we are now at the time in the agenda when I ask trustees, do you have any possible conflicts of interest, to please declare them. Trustee Laskin, please go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I declared a possible conflict of interest on an item in private session because my daughter is a member of Elementary Teachers Federation of Ontario.
Okay, thank you. And I'm not hearing or seeing any other declarations, so we will move on with item number 13, which is matters to be decided without discussion. On the consent agenda this evening, we have everything except for item number 15.1, 1, and 15.12. Everything else is to be decided without discussion. So can I have a mover and a seconder for the consent agenda? Trustee Williams and Trustee Arts, thank you. All those in favor, please raise your hands, or if you're online, if you could let us know how you vote. Any opposed? Okay, so on the screen you can see all those items that that has carried, and those are all the items that have been decided without discussion. So moving on, we are now at item number 15.11. This is from the Governance and Policy Committee report number 3 from March 20th, and the item is PO 67, Learning Opportunities Index Policy Review, Phase 3, and I'd like to turn it over to the director to introduce this item, please.
Thank you very much. Through you, Chair, I'll offer some brief remarks and then turn it over to staff. The Learning Opportunities Policy is one of the foundational policies of the Toronto District School Board. Dare I say, we would not have achieved some of the innovations and improvements in learning and service without it. It's been a driving force for us to close the opportunity gaps that so many of our students face. The LOI is designed to identify disparities in access and opportunities to education. It recognizes that not all of our students have the resources that they need in order to be successful in life. It is the policy that sets out the context for equitable, not equal, but equitable resource allocation. And fundamentally, it's created a shift in the way we think and we serve students. It's caused educators across generations in the TDSB to recognize that at times our students need different resources in order to succeed. And through the equitable allocation of resources, we are not taking away from the success and our commitment to ensure that each and every student in our system is successful. Out of this policy has arisen the Model Schools for Inner Cities. Most recently, there was a report on revitalizing school environments and grounds and some of our staffing allocations. The Learning Opportunities Index, like many TDSB policies, has been groundbreaking in that it's caused other boards to adapt similar policies or procedures in their boards. We are not alone. The United Way identified priority neighborhoods in Toronto. This is another example of equitable resource allocation. The Ministry of Education, through its grant structures, has supported the urban priority high schools, Focus on Youth, the Special Education Grant, and the Learning Opportunities Grants are all models of differentiated resource allocation. As staff, we understand that remaining committed to equitable resource allocation and application where needed in a time of limited resources and immense needs is difficult. We are very hopeful, though, that the board, through this renewal of the policy, will continue to lead and model a public education system that serves all its children while recognizing that some children and families face varying degrees of challenge and underservice, and that we can make a difference in providing them with opportunities to achieve high educational outcomes, the outcomes they aspire for them, for their lives. Thank you very much, and I will now turn it over to our senior manager, Dr. David Cameron, if he would like to make any remarks. Otherwise, staff will take questions.
Thank you to the chair. The Learning Opportunities Index, in terms of the policy review itself, the motions in play, I feel stretched beyond the LOI policy itself in relation to decision-making, discretionary decision-making. The LOI is a tool, the policy was designed as a tool. So I guess that's my main feedback with some of the motions that are occurring here. They seem to point at decision making itself. The LOI itself is just one tool that you might be using in decision making. So that's my main thrust in terms of the motions that have been passed, and they're important, and that kind of decision making needs to be, I think, on the floor. But I also think that the LOI policy was really designed as just a tool in the toolbox. So what's going on, it feels like, is the motions themselves are talking about discretionary decision making about discretionary resources and allocations, which are relevant, but the LOI itself inside of this NPO 67 is really just about one tool. So I think the discussion needs to happen, but that's probably the area that I'm seeing in this, is that the approach to how do we understand staff decision making in discretionary resource allocation. The LOI is a part of it, but I think the conversation is much bigger than just that tool.
So we have Trustee Laskin followed by Trustee Williams. So I'll hand the floor over, Trustee Laskin, to you.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I first of all, I thank staff for their comments and the importance of.
Asking if I can get a point of order. I know I had a conversation with a couple of folks prior to the meeting. can we have an explanation of what's before us? And so we understand, right? Because we don't have the original report. So I just want to understand what it is we're going to be discussing first, and if there are any motions and so on. Sorry, Trustee Laskin, meant to ask before.
Okay, so what is on the floor is the recommendation from GPC. Just give me 1 minute. Yeah. So just to clarify, Trustee DeVitis, are you asking what's on the floor at the moment, or are you asking for an explanation of what's on the floor?
Through the chair, if the point of order is for me to understand what's currently on the floor, because I understand there may be a motion later as well. But if you could just explain to us what's before us, that would be helpful for me. Thank you. Right now.
So what is on the floor right now are recommendations A and B.
C, D, E.
I can't see those. Okay.
It's multiple pages.
Sorry. I'm talking about what's on
Yeah.
the screen. If we could move it down, it would be easier to understand. Okay. So it's also in eScribe, and it's also in our package from today.
Chair, I'm happy to speak to parts A and B that I moved to committee.
Trustee Earhart, you don't have the floor, but we can add you to the list, okay?
Thank you.
But that's not on the floor yet. It hasn't been moved.
Part of the reason why I'm asking questions.
What's on the floor at the moment is the report from GPC, which had an amendment, well, it had a recommendation, and that is what's on the floor. And it's quite an extensive one.
It is no. Thank you.
Does that help, Trustee DeVitis?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Trustee Laskin, you may resume.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Madam Chair. So as I understand it, the committee moved additional recommendations, and they are included in B, but the whole recommendation is parts A, B, and C that are all before us tonight from your agenda package. In the additional recommendations from the committee, to Mr. Cameron's point, I think there was an understanding that the LOI is a tool, but understanding how that tool is used was essential to understanding the whole policy. And my understanding of how the tool is used needs some clarification based upon the last round of vice principal allocations. So I actually would like to move an amendment, and that is in your packages. And the amendment is part of Part B, but it's under A, small letter A. So under small letter A, it says, under small letter A, it says that prior to public consultation be initiated, the following information be provided to board. So it's not necessarily about the policy, Mr. Cameron, it's about information to board. And it says additions to the descriptive evaluation of the use of LOI and allocating resources to schools to be included for information as part of the review, including, and then under small I, it said a list of staff allocations made by the board that use LOI as part of their operational allocations following board approvals of levels and any formulas used. That was approved by the committee. I would like to add, after that first statement, and a rationale for the use of LOI and the allocation of that staffing category, and then a series of other asks under the small I. And there's a specific reason for this, and I know we're at board, so I'm going to run out of time. So I'd like to ask staff for the use of LOI and the vice principal allocation for the 2024-2025 school year. Was the vice principal allocation formula from February 2022 used?
Through the chair, yes, that's correct.
So my further question then to staff is, based upon the allocations from my ward, and I'm only one, it's pretty clear there are anomalies in the use of the allocation formula, because schools that would have generated a 0.5 VP based upon the formula from February 2022 did not receive a 0.5 VP. So I would like to ask staff, which is one of the reasons why I included number 4, because there has to be a transparent accountability if we're using a formula and I look at the numbers and I look at the points total and the school is to generate a 0.5 according to the formula, and it doesn't. I'd like an understanding from staff how I am to explain that to the community.
Through the chair, the vice principal allocation is determined through both a base allocation based on a specific weighted formula and through local decision making. The elementary allocation consists of 3 steps per that report presented in February 2022. Step 1 is determining points for each school. Step 2, determining a base allocation from the points. And step 3, local decision making. School enrollment is and does remain the largest factor in the allocation formula, as larger schools require a different level of administrative support compared to smaller. This does not change in the proposed, or did not change in the 2024-25 school year. Excuse me. Similarly, school program remains a significant factor, as schools with more complex programming require additional support. What did change back in 2022 and remains consistent was the proposed changes to the priority of LOI and the allocation. As I understand it, first, the model received gave schools with a low LOI rank a higher factor. Second, schools ranked 1 through 10 on the LOI were allocated a 1.0 VP to start. This allocation model recognizes that a low LOI ranked school has additional needs when compared to a school of the same size of the larger LOI ranking. Elementary vice principal allocation model was used in 2022-2023 school year and the remaining years thereafter, as I understand it.
Thank you very much. Through you, Madam Chair, back to staff. In the report from June 2022, which you say was used for the allocation, there is a step in local decision-making that says the executive superintendent shares this information with the learning network superintendents, local trustees, and other staff to identify the needs and priorities of the individual school communities and the learning centers overall. That was a step that was to be used before the allocations were final. I conferred with my executive superintendent. That step was not followed. So my question to staff is, in addition to these allocations here, what process where there will be where trustees become aware now that this policy was to have, this allocation formula was to have been used for the allocation of VPs, understanding schools generate through this formula and there is local decision-making when schools who would have generated a 0.5 VP do not currently have a 0.5 VP, what is the remedy? Thank you, through you, Madam Chair.
Through the chair, I'll just start, and if there are any additional comments by Executive Officer Kennedy. Obviously, as we are talking within the framework of a policy review, if there are operational decisions that have not been executed, we can certainly consider that as we continue with our policy development pieces. But in the meantime, of course, in any type of activity as it relates to staffing allocation, there are, of course, many opportunities for improvement, and we will be considering all the comments received to factor into future communications and decisions. Thanks.
I'm sorry, through you, Madam Chair, I didn't understand. So the remedy now, when the June 2020 second allocation formula was not followed for the 2024-2025 school year? Through you, Madam Chair, and I know my time is up.
Through the chair, just in terms of operationalization of that particular thing, I believe it's probably best addressed with people in culture and the executive superintendent to discuss individually, because obviously there are some details that may have to be shared, and that's probably best in that forum. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair.
And I would just remind you that as the mover, you get to close as well at that point. So we do have a speakers list. Next up, we have trustee, no, okay. We're on the amendment. So did you wish to speak on the main motion, trustee Williams, or do you wish to be removed entirely from the list?
Remove me from the list.
Okay, thank you. Trustee DeVitis, you're next. Unless you're on the original motion.
On the amendment.
Okay, thanks.
To the movers, I had a question, clarification. So item number 4 on the list, as I understand it, it says that there should be a formula applied, or there ought to have been a formula applied, but it was not the case. Is that correct? Yes? So if that's the case, and that's the main thrust, the issue of not allocating the formula properly, why we're having a conversation that ties this to the LOI policy itself? Why not ask for a separate report in a different context that sort of clarifies and brings transparency how those VP allocations happen, and separate it from what I think is the principal equity tool that we have to allocate resources? Because I'm not sure that I can support this, because it's tying together maybe the lack of proper use of the tool with an investigation of the tool. And I'm not sure I like the direction that this is going. I'm hoping I was able to ask the question clearly. So the question's to the movers.
So I think because this is a clarification, I just asked Ms. Joseph Dowers from governance for her perspective. Because you're being asked for clarification, you may respond.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. What was moved in committee already asked for the list of staff allocations made that use the LOI. And it also asked for their examples of the letters and illustrative examples of. So it seemed to me that it opened the door to the actual allocation formula that uses LOI, because it is one of the staffing positions that was already referred to in the operational allocation. So it's just asking for more clarity on that, and that is why it is here. But you are right, it's not directly affected by the policy development, but I felt that because what was moved by the committee opened that door about how it's then used in the staffing allocation, that it would be in order as an amendment.
No, and that's a fair answer, through the chair. The thing I would add is that, to be honest, I think with what we're asking staff to do in this, first of all, I'm going to have some questions about the overall package because I'm confused about all the things that we're trying to do and how they connect to the original report. But I think we're going too far on this. I think if we want to have a conversation about how VPs are allocated, I think that should be a standalone conversation. It's a very fair question for us to ask about that process. I don't know that we need to connect it to LOI as a policy because the use of LOI would be something I think that most of us would be okay with, I could say, right? Because otherwise we muddy the waters and we connect two things that may not necessarily be connected. Ultimately, we don't have enough funds for all the VPs we need. I think that's something that all of us understand. So I'm not going to be able to support the motion. I'll have some more questions for staff when we get into the rest of the report. But thank you for doing this. I mean, when and if we get into a conversation about like the larger process and how those VPs are allocated, I think that's a fair thing for us to investigate. I just don't think we should connect it to the policy review here. Thank you.
Okay, up next we have Trustee Earhart, who's the seconder on this amendment. Trustee Earhart, please go ahead.
Thanks very much. Sorry, I don't have my screen on. I was at, I'm trying to do too many things at once and was at an important community meeting that I'm in transit from. So I am seconding this amendment to a motion that I moved at committee. I consider it a friendly amendment that's in line with some of the information that I believe during a consultation period constituents may ask. A key theme that I am hearing is, frankly, confusion or a desire for more understanding of what LOI is, how it factors into allocation decision making, and to what extent it is correlated with changes to staffing or shifting of staffing. It's not a question of if that is the correct thing to be doing or not. I do believe that allocations for equity purposes are justifiable. However, it's not transparently conveyed to communities through the information that we have available. And so I believe that through any public consultation for LOI, this will be helpful information on hand to support the consultation process. I hope that that is helpful. I also believe it will be helpful for broader processes, but I do believe it will be supportive of the consultation and in the spirit of the original amendment. Thank you.
Thank you, Trustee Earhart. Vice Chair Shen, please go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Through you, Madam Chair, to staff, what are the different staff positions that LOI can impact on allocations?
Through the chair, my understanding is that a staffing allocation is related to teachers and in both elementary and secondary, along with vice principals and principals in the academic space.
Thank you, and through you. In addition, staff look at graduation coaches. We look at the placement of summer schools, community agency programs to create additional support for schools. When there is additional money that is announced by the ministry, we would look at the LOI to be providing extra support for resources, and if there's additional contract staff, that would be possible through the summer. Child and CSWs, vice principals, obviously, and office staff. So there are many examples that the senior team provided where the LOI would be one element of consideration. And I apologize for missing the first part of this conversation as I was supporting Mr. Lepofsky outside of the building. But what I would have wanted to say at an early opportunity is that certainly staff are paying very assiduous attention to the conversation among trustees this evening, and as we are developing the policy and getting ready for consultation, wanting to be sure that we are providing a fulsome support structure so that we are meeting the needs that are articulated this evening. So thank you.
Thank you. Through you, Madam Chair, it definitely looks like there are multiple number of positions that are impacted by LOI, and a policy review of LOI should be talking about all those multiple positions, not necessarily highly focused on one of the positions where it's requested here. But I'm assuming the policy review will then look at all of the positions that are being shaped by the LOI, I'm assuming, if that's in the works, if it was being going through consultation.
Thank you, and through the chair. Certainly what we're hearing from the feedback from trustees is transparency is really important, and building a shared understanding among trustees as well as community is a priority. We're thinking about the guiding principles that we can be making transparent, to be making clear about the operational decisions that we make daily, weekly, monthly in regards to supporting the needs of our system. Thank you.
Thank you. Just a clarification on the part 3 in this, and I think it's talking about if there's a situation where the formula is not working to support community in crisis or transition, the director consider adding additional resources. At that point, it should be a system decision, not local decision. Does it fit from staff point of view within this motion where it's asking for information about different things for a review, and then there's a directive right in the middle of it that talks about a particular intervention? It doesn't look like a part of that, and it could be to the mover or to the staff to see. I'm having a bit of a difficulty understanding how that fits in with the broader motion that's looking for information to be presented to the board before going for consultation, because that looks like a bit of a directive, which may be good or bad. I'm not debating that, but I'm seeing if that sinks in well, either from a governance point of view or from a policy or follow-up point of view from the staff.
Through the chair, staff did note that this particular point is different in focus than the other points within the motion. We believe that it's probably a principle that guides application that would be in the policy rather than requesting additional information from us specifically.
Thank you. Going to the second point where it's about a rationale of how profile staff are distributed by Learning Center for Local Decision Making. Is that pertain to LOI directly, or does it pertain to multiple factors, including LOI? The second point.
Thank you very much. Through the chair, it's multiple factors that are always considered. LOI, as mentioned earlier by Dr. Cameron, is one of the factors or one of the tools used as part of an allocation. I think it's important to note for the boards.
Why?
Doesn't make sense.
No, it does make sense.
I know, but it's talking to me.
I think you're not on mute.
Can we mute trustee? Thank you.
I think it's important to note that LOI, particularly where it is weighted and is one of the factors for consideration, doesn't always change the allocation to a school.
Thank you. And the last point here on the formula that's used for VP allocation, again, I'm having difficulty understanding if that has to be, the review of that formula and LOI policy review has to be merged together. Funding formula allocation formula for VPs may or may not be needed to be reviewed, and I can support that process if that needs to be reviewed, but does it have to be done together with LOI policy review, and does it even make sense from a policy review cycle purposes to do those two together?
Thank you very much. Through the chair, I believe in 2022, we looked at the VP allocation formula, which was done outside of the LOI policy review. So the answer to your question is that it is not inherently tied to this particular policy review.
Okay. So my next question then is, if this was to go without the amendments, if this was to pass without the amendments, the LOI review would still, in some way, relate to how LOI contributes to determining VP allocations.
Through the chair, that's an important question. Could you repeat it, please?
So I'm asking if this amendment was defeated, for hypothetically if it's defeated, and the rest of it passes, and you're doing a policy review of LOI, that would still include a conversation about how LOI would shape VP allocation in the process.
Thank you very much. Thank you for restating the question. That is correct. All of the allocations that are guided by this policy would necessarily be reviewed.
Thank you, through you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Director. That's exactly why I understand the rationale. I understand the urgency of this matter and why it's being brought together today. I find it difficult for multiple reasons to support this. One, a lot of this is not directly needed to be part of an LOI. I think many of them are broader in scope than LOI, and despite whether it moves or not moves, there would still be a review of how LOI contributes to allocation of vice principals. So I do think that it's important to have as much clarity in a policy review when we go to public to have something, and the multiple factors that get included into this would make it more confusing for people to understand. So I would support, I would urge others to also think of it that way. And if there is a future motion that is business arising or something around VP review, I will be more than happy to consider that from that point of view. At this time, it doesn't make sense. And particularly, I was also seeing number 3, that seems like a directive in terms of how an intervention operationally needs to be done, which doesn't quite sink in with the rest of the motion as well. So I'll stop with that, and looking forward to hearing others' views.
Okay, next up we have Trustee Rajikulasingham. Please go ahead.
Thank you for the chair. At GPC, we had a really fruitful conversation about LOI and the multiple variables that tell us about our communities and challenges they face that may not be captured through LOI and also through postal codes. And one thing that staff kept sharing and I think really hit home for me was that LOI is not solely used on its own, and that we do take other variables into account. So English language learners, special education needs, newcomer, and one that I've also brought up multiple times, precarious immigration and housing needs for folks that don't have access to a postal code. We know that poverty and challenges exist across Toronto, and I think when it comes to understanding the proportion of it, LOI is an incredibly important tool to really understand local challenges. So, Trustee Laskin, I heard your concern of what happened in that specific school. And to me, the way that I interpret that is it sounds like an operational issue versus an issue of LOI as a formula. And so when it comes to this amendment, the issue that I have with number 3 is, first of all, let me ask staff a question. When we look at external variables and LOI, has there been any instances in the past few years where they both didn't align, where maybe there are a lot of variables that share challenges that exist in the community, but the LOI didn't match? Has that ever happened in the past few years?
Thank you, and through the chair. That was a complex question, trustee, and I'm going to rephrase it, and I'm looking to our LC executives who may have specific examples, and also Dr. Cameron to be thinking of examples. I believe your question was, has there ever been a time when we are working with schools, we understand their LOI ranking, and yet what is observable to us does not match our concept of what the LOI score is? Have I interpreted that correctly?
So when we looked at through the chair of the variables, so English language learners, what are those variables are? If the variables are telling us one set of information, but maybe it doesn't match the LOI, has that ever happened? Or are they fairly telling us the same?
Okay, I'm going to turn to Dr. Cameron, and I'm seeing Associate Director Salmon wanting to contribute, but go ahead, AD Salmon.
Thanks, and through the chair. When we look at the actual point system that makes up the actual process around VP allocation. We look at head count, we look at grade 7, 8, French programming, gifted programming, non-gifted intensive support programs, and learning opportunities index. Part of, at times, there will be situations in schools where we know, based on specific need and situations, we in fact have to take a different approach. And we've had to do that. I'll give you one particular example in the last year and a half where a secondary school was very much within a significant critical type of situation where the LOI and all of the other indicators, in fact, would not say that this particular school would warrant a fundamental change. But the reality is we had to intervene. We had to intervene in order to provide support. We provided unique types of support with respect to teacher allocation, which was something we actually had never done before in the middle of the school year. And we also intervened in other situations where we've had to temporarily add vice principals in order to support a school that was going through a particular challenging situation. So yes, there in fact have been those situations. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that. So I guess my concern is with number 3, and when we say support community in crisis or transition where formula is not working, just hearing about the different other variables that staff had just mentioned, my concern is when a resource isn't allocated in a community, that this number 3 may be used arbitrarily when there is a lot of local pressure. So I think at this point, I cannot support this motion, just because I think this policy is up for review. The methodology will also be up for review after that. And I think the process should happen, and then perhaps we can take a deeper dive once we know what the actual updated policy looks like. Thank you.
Okay, we have Trustee McLean followed by Trustee Shiskandarajah. So Trustee McLean, over to you.
Thank you, and through the chair. We've talked a little bit about how the LOI is just a tool in some of this, but in actuality, if the LOI suggests that you're 1 to 10, it is a singular determinant in terms of a VP allocation. In that case, it's the domino that turns over and does that. So there's some applications where it's very directly and has an immediate effect. I would like to request that we vote on these at seriatim because I, like some of my colleagues, like some of this more than others. So I'd like to do that. I also find it, Trustee Didavides, I share his concern about tying this in, but we find ourselves at a time where we're going through difficult budget decisions, and we made challenging decisions about VPs, about putting them back into the system. And then Monday, we were, as trustees, we were notified about the allocations and how it reflected in our awards. And I know in my circumstances, and I won't speak for my colleagues, but the answers I got around the local decision-making were not transparent and not complete and not responsive, quite frankly. So this ends up, the need for this ends up being, or at least some of this ends up being, timely and important for me. I do understand the nature around a hard system with no ability to pivot doesn't work for us. But if we're going to have a local decision and the ability to pivot, then the rationale for why that happens should be clear and should be explainable to the communities who get them and to the communities who lose them. How that gets to be. And that hasn't been my experience this week. So that makes this, at least part of this, more attractive to me. So I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Trustee Shiskandarajah, you have the floor.
Thank you. Through you, Madam Chair, I will not be supporting this motion. I'm just at loss
Reminder,
at
we're
what's
voting on the
happening.
amendment. Just as a
Sorry,
reminder,
the
I want to make
amendment,
sure
yes.
we're on the right
Yes,
piece.
the amendment. I think it's, wading into operational matters. I'm not really sure why we're doing this around VPs when there's a whole host of other staffing issues that don't come to the floor. So I understand that people are upset, as they are in my ward too, that their VPs are not coming back or are being placed somewhere else. But let's have other conversations. I have 2 classes now next year that's going to be a 3-grade split, and I'm really curious how many other schools are dealing with that. So I think I'm not really sure why this is taking up so much space at this particular juncture when we're talking about the Learning Opportunities Index policy review. As my colleagues before said, I'm not sure why there's a directive that's sort of just embedded in between all of the other things that are purporting to ask for greater transparency. I'm obviously a proponent of greater transparency at the board. I'm just very confused over how this is playing out. We know we need flexibility in formulas. This is a board that constantly critiques the province's formulas that they give us and don't adequately fund us. And what we do with that is we make decisions that require flexibility, like funding our special ed program above and beyond what the province funds us for. So I have concerns about the sort of attachment we're having to these formulas, as if we don't use flexible, sort of measures in our other formulas. It was brought up, what is the remedy for the current issue? The remedy is quite simple. We need more VP. Like I am baffled that we're sitting here arguing about, if a school in need needs it more than another school who also has needs and perhaps different needs. Like, that to me is not at all the conversation we should be having. The conversation should be about more VPs. The other thing that I think is just extremely dangerous is dumping this all on LOI, especially tying it to the issue of VP when we know communities are very attached to their VPs. And to me, it seems like we're vilifying LOI and trying to poke holes into it. We know it's not a perfect tool, but trying to use this almost as a way to mobilize against use of LOI, to kind of point out its flaws and to kind of say that LOI is the reason why your principal at your school is not coming back, or vice principal rather is not coming back, which to me is not how the conversation should be framed. I think it's very dangerous, especially in this climate. It's going down the road of saying you're not getting something because of all these equity policies. And all these other schools are getting all of these things that should really be yours. I think there needs to be a separating of these issues. And like Trustee Shan said, yes, if we want to review certain things, we can do that outside of this policy. To just pull out one thing that people are upset about, I'm very upset about having 3-grade split classes. I would love more information on how we're making those sort of allocation decisions, but I'm not saying LOI is the reason for that. So I can't support this, and I think it takes us down a really, we're going backwards. This is not the progress that we should be aiming for. Thank you.
Thank you, Trustee Suskandaraja. That brings us to the end of the speakers list. Trustee Laskin, do you wish to close, as this is your amendment?
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I've listened carefully to my colleagues. There are a lot of assumptions being made and the motives behind this formula, which are simply not true. Thank you.
Okay, so we're going to be voting ad seriatim, as there was a request for that, on this amendment. And then we will go back to the main motion. Will we be using eScribe for this ad seriatim? Okay, thank you. Okay, the vote is open on part 1.
Trustee Earhart in favor. Trustee Ghost not in favor.
Trustee Nunziata against.
Trustee Patel against.
Sriskandarajah against.
Dawson against.
Trustee Wong against.
Okay, that has been defeated. We're going to vote now on item number 2.
Trustee Earhart in favor.
Trustee Patel against.
Trustee Nunziata against.
Trustee Ghost against.
Sriskandarajah against.
Trustee Pay against.
Wong against.
That has been defeated. Part C, or part 3.
Trustee Earhart in favor.
Trustee Patel against.
Trustee Ghost against.
Trustee Pay against.
Sriskandarajah against.
Nunziata against.
Hastings against.
Wong against.
And then part 4.
The vote is open for part 4.
Trustee Ghost against.
Trustee Nunziata against.
Sriskandarajah against.
Trustee Earhart in favor.
Trustee Pay against. Patel against.
Hastings against.
Trustee Wong, how do you vote?
I'm voting against. Thank you.
Okay, and that has been defeated. So we're now going to go back to the main motion or the main recommendation that came out of committee. This sits unchanged from, at this point, from what we were talking about earlier. So do we have any speakers on the list for this? Trustee DeVitis, please go ahead.
Thank you. So I have a couple of questions. So I understand there were a couple additions, B and C. I'm going to start with the part that I find more difficult to understand, and really honestly, just me wanting to understand the intent, part C, the part that starts clarification and the policy and so on. Can someone, whether it was the original mover, one of our trustees, or staff, explain to me what that clause would like to do? To the chair.
I don't believe, I'm just looking to staff, or do you feel unable to explain what that is? You're looking to the mover, the original mover? Okay, could the original mover, I believe that was you, Trustee Pay, if you could just explain what Trustee DeVitis has asked?
So the part in C that starts with clarification in the policy of appropriate external equity factors to be considered in staff's discretionary powers to discount LOI data. What do you mean here? What are you trying to accomplish? I'm trying to understand that.
What I mean is, just like Dr. Cameron mentioned, that is LOI is one of decision-making process or factors. It's not a sole factors. So there's going to be other factors being factored into the decision-making. So what I want to do is here, just ask for staff to provide clarities, about what other factors can be factored into the, decision-making.
So I guess just to throw out a couple examples, there's a great tragedy in a school, a fire. There were many different issues. You want a listing of the type of things that could be factored in, like the real life examples of the other things that would be taken into consideration to make decisions?
I'm not asking list all the individual factors.
Okay.
I'm asking for specific category factors. So the stuff is, if they're talking about like maybe there's a, flux of refugee into the school.
Sure.
They need, more support, maybe, there are a large number of French immersion students, coming to the school. They need a busing, have the school to the school. I mean, for example, if, have a school, in my ward, I bus a lot of your students from your ward to my school. That's all the factors, but that's not really a factor into LOI. So I'm asking really about clarification. When you make a discretion, decision, what are they? How do you make it a decision?
Okay, and let me ask about point number 2 as well, because again, similarly,
Okay.
just if you can clarify, it starts requirements that similar statistical rigor be applied and so on. So what are you trying to request from staff there?
I think LOI is a policy that was built on a really rigorous, statistical analysis. So I just wanted the staff, when they use a discretionary, factors, I wanted they really do their own analysis, to show that, that type of factors or that type of, indication really support the decision making.
Okay, thank you for that. So the following question I think is to staff. So thank you through the chair.
Yeah.
To Trustee Pei for answering that question. So to staff, the original report, did it ask for direction for how LOI is used, or was it a policy review of what LOI is and should be? Which one, or is there a mix?
Thank you, and through the chair. The policy review is intended to describe the use of the LOI. The consideration of the factors is a separate process and will follow the policy. Thank you.
Okay, so because there are a number of motions, two motions here that try, through chair, that try to give direction in terms of how the LOI is complemented, how it's used, and so on. Is that the original intent of staff to figure out how LOI should be and in what context it should be used? Or was the original intent for staff to look at how, were we trying to look at all these external factors and how they apply to LOI and decision making? Or were we trying to look first at what LOI needs to do and be?
Thank you, and through the chair. The board has a long-standing history and use and endorsement of the LOI in attempt to enable equitable outcomes for students as well as equitable access to opportunities. There is mention within the draft policy that outlines the discretion necessary by staff to make operational decisions where, and we've tried to qualify additional resources are being allocated. It is not our intention within the policy to be articulating when the LOI would not be used. I hope that's helpful.
No, it is for me, because I'm confused by a couple of different sections of the different motions that sound very similar, and to me are starting the process of determining how we use LOI, which I think is coming before we need to, before we have all the information to make that type of decision, A. And B, I'm reading from B, consideration of metrics that could be used alongside or in addition to current school board LOI to consider impacts on program choice and so on and so on. And it sounds exactly like C2. So I'm not sure why we have two motions before us as part of the same report that ask to do similar things and that are also outside of the original sort of purview of the intent of the report by staff that get us to start making decisions and give directions to staff before we have the rest of the information that the two motions are asking for. So difficult for me to understand, to be honest. Difficult for me to understand how staff report back to us in a way that is sensible from the different directions. We're asking for A before we get B. And difficult for me to understand the length of the conversation. I'm going to be honest, I did not participate at the committee, so I'm obviously missing a part of the information. I've been trying to understand it. I read it originally, couldn't make sense of it. I had a number of people trying to explain parts of it, couldn't make sense of it. And I'm still sort of struggling to understand how staff would action all the things that are here when even some of the different sections ask for the same thing with different language, not necessarily contradicting each other, but why is it there twice? So I'm not sure how we're going to vote on this, and like, you know, if we're going to break it up by parts, if it's all one report, but maybe if I can have some clarity from the chairs to what we expect to get from this. It's all coming back as one report because we have different direction. And as someone that came new to it, not having participated in the conversation, I'm lost as to what we're getting back from this.
So to your question of voting ad seriatim, potentially, Ms. Joseph Dowers just made a suggestion that we could do.
Point of order, you, Madam Chair.
Pardon me.
Yeah.
What's your point of order, Trustee Pei?
Actually, I'm a little confused because first we voted on the amendment of the motion, which is part B. But we never voted for the part B. Then we went for part C.
So right now, well, first we had an amendment
Okay.
to what we were originally looking at. We went into an amendment right away. That was defeated. So now we're back to what we first put up. Trustee DeVitis has asked, is there a way that we can vote on what's before us in a potential ad seriatim way? It's a little bit complicated because of this being part of a report with a number of different pieces, but Ms. Joseph Dowers had an idea that I was about to ask her to explain.
But you, Madam Chair, if I understand correctly.
What is your point of order, though? Before, I can put you on the speakers list, but if you have a point of order, just explain to me how I understand.
Okay, my point of order is we're supposed to discuss Part B, that's original motion, which was amended by Trustee Laskin. We didn't discuss that part.
Trustee Laskin's amendment was defeated. It's gone.
I understand. But what about the original motion? Do we still vote for the original motion, or we just?
That's what we're talking about now, but we're just talking about, we're not at voting yet. We're not even close to there yet. Trustee DeVitis has the floor, and he has asked, is it possible when we get to voting, can we do it ad seriatim? So that's what I'm dealing with just at the moment. Does that make sense?
You know what is because, Madam Chair, if you look at the screen up here, it's different from the screen I was looking. Trustee DeVitis was asking, because Trustee DeVitis was asking Part C here, which is my motion. Part B was a motion by Trustee Earnhardt and Trustee,
No.
Literally my question too.
Yeah.
So what we're looking at is the whole report from GPC, which includes your motion. Your motion isn't separate. It's part of it now.
Oh, okay.
Okay?
Understand.
But there is a question, can we vote ad seriatim? We're not at voting yet, but when we do, can we do it ad seriatim?
Okay, got it. Thank you very much.
So I'm just
Madam
going to
Chair.
go
Okay.
to Ms. Joseph Dowers to explain a potential way forward as to how we might do that ad seriatim. We would do A, B, and C.
But in the GPC, there are two motions, right? Now we combine the two motions together to vote?
It's one motion with three parts, which we're going to potentially look at. The suggestion has been made, can we do it in three different parts? And we'll go through those when we're voting them to make sure everybody understands what we're voting on, okay?
Okay, great. Thank you very much, Madam Chair.
Okay. Do you have a point of order? Because we have a speakers list.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Since I was not part of GP's discussion, I want to make sure, is this a motion or this is a report?
Well, Part A is that the report be received. Part B is a referral for consideration. And Part C is a motion.
So what,
What we're going to do is.
but that's what I need a clarification from Trustee DeVitis. Are we rearranging things or are we removing
We're
things?
not rearranging things.
We are removing things.
No, we're not removing anything. We're just going to vote on them in separate chunks because that's what was requested.
But if
But
something.
we're not at voting yet. We haven't even discussed it yet.
But this is where I'm confused, that if we vote yes or no on any of this item, if it's defeated, what happens to that item? It goes away.
Yeah.
So it means we are deleting, or we are something will be deleted if it's voted no.
What happens at committee is voted on by committee. It then comes to the whole board where everybody has a crack at it.
So we are making
Because
changes to the whole
you only
report.
have 6 or 7 people who can actually vote. But now it's up to all 22 of us, or however many of us are present. We all get a chance to vote. So things can always go away or be added or be changed at board, because that's when you get all 22 voices.
That's good. Thank you.
Okay?
Got it.
I hope that clarifies. I know it seems confusing with this because it's a big piece with a lot of moving parts in it. Trustee DeVitas, you still have the floor.
Well, thank you, and thank you for my colleagues for helping me in trying to clarify it. So we have 3 sections. You did a good job of describing the 3 sections. So as I understand it, we can actually vote on them separately. As Trustee Patel confirmed, if we vote against all of them, then the report goes away, and actually there's no action items, which I wouldn't want. But I'm confused about some of the other direction that we've given, so I'm considering voting against some of them at least. And I would ask my colleagues that if they don't understand what they're voting, that they probably should vote against it.
I would just remind everybody also that there's lots of tools in your toolbox as trustees. You can approve, you can not approve, you can refer, you can, there's lots of different things we can do with all of these different pieces. So there are governance rules that our bylaws provide us lots of different things that we can do with. So you have lots of tools in your toolbox that you can use as we go through this. It's not always just an either or also. I just say that so that everybody, I just want to make sure, because I feel like there's been some confusion tonight about how we deal with all of these. But I do admit this is a complicated one. So we're on right now the whole amendment, and there's a speaker's list. I believe I'm here, right? Trustee Earhart, followed by Trustee Arts, and I think that's it for the speaker's list so far.
Thanks very much. I was at GPC, albeit also remote for some of it, and so this is bringing back memories of we moved a bunch of items that were not all pieced together. They were different pieces that I believe made this up. I was involved in moving Part B that were referred for consideration in developing the policy. So I don't believe would stop the policy. It would continue into the consultation phase. And in my view, they were all elements that would support the consultation process, as well as support consideration by trustees at further stages of the policy process, largely around descriptions of how LOI is used, a rationale for linking to that use. These to me are transparency items that I think are helpful to build the understanding. There was also delegations over time for this process that noted the importance of focus groups and experts. And so we had requested for consideration, as there may be confidentiality, there may be rationale for why it is not was not immediately forthcoming, which was very reasonable in the discussion that we had, that there would be a summary of any meetings held with focus groups and a list of experts that had been engaged, any updated proposals for the LOI definition, methodology, and formula. And I see this as there has been a standing basis during GPC through delegations and through staff advice presented, a bit of a back and forth as to what comes first. The policy, the methodology can both be done together. Staff advice has been the policy followed by the methodological review, which would, as the policy change, would trigger a methodological review, if I understood correctly. And staff, I hope can correct me there. But we had also received delegations over time with the view that both should be done together. So that was really to make sure that there was some transparent update on where that stood and why, to support consultation and any questions that may be asked about that particular point, as it had been a topic of discussion. Considerations of metrics that could be used alongside or in addition. That some of that information had been provided as part of the committee's to support committee discussions, and was brought up during phase 1. And so we felt it important to reiterate this includes impacts of programs of choice, gentrification, and
And just to emphasize, as my colleagues have emphasized this to me as I continue in my learning, the deepening and concentration of poverty and other matters that may relate to equity and educational outcomes within schools. And then a description of the Learning Opportunities Grant and how it relates to LOI in this policy, as it is something that we understand is often discussed in relation to LOI, and that during public consultation, there would be a benefit to a clear description to support discussions underway. So that was the rationale for putting that forward. I still believe it would be helpful. As to how it relates to point C, they weren't introduced, I think, to be necessarily together, which may be why trustees have felt that. I would be interested in understanding if it does fit, the LOI be referred back to staff for further revisions and clarification. Does that stop the process of going to consultation? Does it align with A, that we receive the report and move to the next phase of the policy process? That would be my question. And does staff see anything else that's sort of out of alignment between B and C, or that would be in conflict? Thanks very much.
So would staff be able to comment on those, the questions by the trustee? I'm Trustee Earhart, were those directed at staff?
If possible, staff are amenable to responding. I would ask for clarification on if support for Part C will allow us to continue to the next phase of policy process. That was the first question. And the second question was if staff view that there's anything contradictory or in conflict between Parts B and Part C that would give them conflicting direction. Thank you.
Thank you, and through you, for the question. I want to clarify that when we are referring to Part B and Part C, we are looking at the large Part B and the large Part C, not sub B and C of Part B, if that makes sense.
Yeah, yes, thank you. Through the chair, that was my intention, the meta B and C. Thank you.
Thank you. The stem of this policy for Part B is that this be referred to staff for consideration as we develop the policy. So we would be considering elements of B and C that were able to be reflected in our process, but we would continue with our consultation process, and we would be considering all of the feedback that we have received through these discussions as information, as we will be engaging further with public. So this would be information for our development, and of course, eventually we are going to be bringing the policy back through to committee and to the full board. So speaking honestly, there are some elements in C that seem contradictory, but we are looking at this as feedback and consideration, and we will be proceeding with our next steps. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Trustee Earhart. Trustee Arts, you're next.
Thank you, through you, Madam Chair. I have to echo much of what Trustee DeVitis said. I read through several times. I was late to the GPC meeting, so I missed the discussion that was on the floor at the time. I'll just try and clarify a couple of, because I only have 5 minutes, a couple of the big pieces that have me stumped. So to Trustee Earhart's comment, when I read this, for both the large B and the large C, the refer back to staff to me meant that in both cases, trustees meant to stop the process, that you wanted it to go back to staff and that you wanted to stop the process here. So I think maybe that's not what I'm hearing, or if that's not your intention, please clarify. For Part B, the be it resolved that prior to public consultation being initiated, The small A, B, C, D, and E are all lovely pieces of information, but really sound like you're requesting a trustee information session or a broader information session. And I think in terms of what I've seen for consultations and larger work around policies, these are the kinds of questions that come up and these are the kinds of questions that are answered. But I'm confused because the prior to public consultations, it seems to be asking for information that is also dependent on public consultations. So a summary of meetings held with focus groups and experts would be the information we would get later. So there's some parts that don't jive here. So I would welcome an info session, and I would say that a little over a year ago, Dr. Cameron actually suggested to the Intercity Advisory Committee that trustees or the board convene a panel discussion. It was actually I thought a really awesome proposal. I did send it to staff, it's never happened, but a panel discussion on the different aspects of LOI and the Learning Opportunities Grant and how the board works all these pieces that would have our research team, our finance staff, our programming staff coming together for the kind of discussions of what's on the page here. So I would welcome that. I would not want to see that kind of info session stop the work and the public consultation pieces on the LOI. On part C, on the big part C, I think in terms of my own word, in terms of over the years, the discretionary decisions that have been made by local staff in terms of what they know about our schools, what's happening in our schools. In the part 2, requirements that similar statistical rigor be applied to discretionary decisions permitted by staff. So requirement to me means that we would not allow discretionary decisions unless they had statistical rigor. And I'll just give you an example. I have a couple of examples actually out over the years. I was at a school with a brand new VP where a 0.5, it's a fairly large school, but is on that cusp of VP allocation, no VP allocation, and a discretionary decision with a new principal was to put a 0.5 VP into that school for the next year to support the turnover of administration and stability within the school system. It was a very good decision considering that that school was having a lot of significant challenges within the community. Another one, very large school, having a lot of student behavioral and violence program issues, also had an additional program, an entire other program added to the school in the year before, a discretionary decision by staff to add additional support staff into that school because they really needed it at the time, and to address student needs. I'm wondering what statistical rigor would be applied that then would you be expecting? And how would we facilitate those necessary discussions, support those necessary discussions at the school level? What is the statistical rigor that would be applied to that kind of community-based needs that is important to allowing our local system to be responsive to student and community need? So I hope those are clear.
Okay, thank you, Trustee Arts. So at this point in the speakers list, I'm not seeing any others who wish to be added besides Trustee Pay. So you have the floor, and then I put in the chat, but just so those who know who aren't on there, you had made a request to vote ad seriatim on Part C. So we could do A, we could do B, and then we could do Part C1 and C2, okay? Please go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Learning Opportunity Index is a policy intended to improve education achievements. Factors using this policy are used specifically because they are most strongly correlated with the student achievements. The same analysis must be done for the introduction of any new consideration of determining factors. It should show at least as strong as a correlation as every other factor. And such analysis must control for the existing factors. Anything less is a drop in the standards. We need this level of rigor to protect and help those students who are in most need. We also need any factor to be objective in design and the implementation in order to ensure fairness. For equity reasons related to the unconscious bias, we need a transparent and objective process that can be critiqued, scrutinized for the possible existence of unconscious bias. The motion is asking for clarity. Clarify when and why discretion can be used by the staff and the relevant factors. Providing clarity is the first step towards transparency. My dear colleagues, I hope you can support this very important motion. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. We will open the vote on part A. I don't understand why transcribe doesn't work.
Madam Chair, am I supposed to see a e-scribe vote come up?
Oh, you know what? Before we go to that, we need a mover and a seconder. Okay, Trustee Williams, Trustee Hassan. Trustee Lee, I didn't hear your question. I think did you say question of clarification?
No, I was just asking if e-scribe is coming up or.
Oh,
I see it
is
now. Thank you.
It's now open.
Trustee Gross in favor.
Trustee Nunziata in favor.
Trustee Pei in favor.
I'm in favor.
Trustee Rajwani, how do you vote? That has carried. We're now going to open part B. I need a mover and a seconder for, no, I don't need a mover and a seconder. We have a mover and a seconder? Oh, right. It's been moved. Sorry. My apologies. The whole thing has been moved. We're just voting on them separately at this point. Okay. So we're going to just open the vote on part B. And this is for referral to staff for consideration in developing policy P067 Learning Opportunities Index. And it's on points A through E. It's very small, the screen. I don't know if we can enlarge it. Or I've gotten a lot older in the last few minutes. eScribe is open though.
Trustee Pei in favor.
Patel in favor.
Nunziata in favor.
Gross in favor.
Trustee Earhart in favor.
Trustee Williams, how do you vote? Oh, I think she's voted. Okay, and that has carried. Now we're going to do C1. It's opened again. C1. Yeah.
Which is C1 now.
Chair, are we voting on this?
Yes, we're voting on C1. The vote is open.
Trustee goes in favor.
Trustee Pay in favor.
Patel in favor.
Trustee Nunziata in favor.
She's voted.
It's not going up.
It went on mute.
It's not going up.
I think eScribe's having trouble figuring it out too tonight. That has carried 15-7. We're now going to vote on C2.
Trustee goes in favor.
Trustee Pay in favor.
Trustee Nunziata in favor.
Sriskandarajah in favor.
Trustee Erhard against.
Patel in favor.
And that has carried. Okay, so moving on to the last item that's off consent agenda, and that is 15.12, PO 21. This is the fundraising policy phase 5. I'd like to turn it over to the director to introduce this item, please.
Thank you, and through the chair. At the GPC meeting, the fundraising policy was brought forward for approval. And at that time, there was a motion from trustees for staff to provide some additional information. So we will just turn it back to trustees, and staff is available to answer any questions. Thank you.
Okay, so the matter that's before us is 15.1.2, PO 21 fundraising policy. I'd like to pass the chair and speak to this. I don't know if there's more speakers on the list.
Madam Chair, can I ask a process question? What point does the minority report come in?
So I'm not going to pass the chair yet. I don't have to pass the chair yet. Pardon? You have a question, Trustee Lee, like a process question?
Correct. I'm just wondering at what point do we talk about the minority report? Just because I don't see it on the screen, so I'm just wondering if that's a part of this or the next item.
I didn't hear the first part of what you asked. I'm sorry. It's hard to hear sometimes online.
Sorry, Madam Chair, I was just wondering, at what point does the minority report get shown on the screen?
So the minority report only comes forward if this does not pass. If this passes, the minority report dies without coming forward.
Oh, I understand. Okay, thank you. That makes sense to
Okay,
me.
so if this fails, then we move to the minority report. Okay.
Thank you.
So we have a speakers list. Were they before me or after me?
You were first.
Okay. So I'd like to pass the chair to the vice chair.
Go ahead, Trustee Chancellor.
Thank you. We had a very interesting discussion at GPC on this item, and I think there were good intentions that trustees had in bringing a recommendation that was different from the staff recommendation. But I'm, to be honest, very uncomfortable with the recommendation that the committee made. And I'd like to just explain why. We had a rich consultation on this item, and over 60% of people who responded were not in favor of mandatory contributions. We had staff recommendations that were not in favor of mandatory contributions. And there were very valid reasons around that with respect to how we would manage that, whether it was even possible, because there are all sorts of implications when we ask parents to fundraise. When we have school councils that fundraise, they have to identify what they're fundraising for, and that would be challenging around this. For me, it's almost more philosophical. I believe that our communities will be more generous if it is voluntary. And I see that in my own riding, in so many school councils who do creative decision-making around how they raise funds and how they donate funds. And I think if we are to put really wonderful examples of the kind of things that many school councils are doing as part of the package that goes out to school councils that suggests how they might put this in their bylaws if they wish to put a monetary number or a percentage number, but that they be in charge of determining that they have a say in how that money is donated. I think we will get more contributions. I think we will not have to own having to show transparently how those funds are being managed that we're somehow collecting. And I just think it is a more productive way forward. So I thank the movers I thank the committee for the change that they suggested to what the recommendation was in the original report. And I would just add one final thing. I'm very uncomfortable with phase 5 going completely flipped from what the staff recommendation report that was on our website showed, and coming back with something that's completely different from that without talking to community more. I've been talking to community in the last couple of weeks since GPC. The feedback I've had has not been in favor of this recommendation. And while I don't always, sometimes I don't always vote, with the votes that I hear from community, because sometimes we have evidence to go the other way. I don't feel like I have that in this case. And so for me, I will not be voting in favor of the recommendation that's before us this evening.
Thank you. Trustee Chanaslang, do I pass it back to you?
Sure. Thank you. So we have a long speakers list ahead of us, which is great. A lot more to say on this. So we have Trustee Rajakula Singham, followed by Trustee Laskin, Earhart, Rajwani, and McLean. Oh, and we missed somebody. And trustee Lee, who's after Earhart before Rajwani. Okay, so over to, and Art, we're adding Arts as well. So over to you, trustee Rajakulasingam.
Thank you, through the chair. I think the LOI policy review and this policy took up a lot of time at GPC, and there were a lot of great, points made for a great conversation. So I think I just wanted to reiterate that today, when we vote, for example, if you were to vote in favor, you're not accepting AB. This would be referred back to staff. So we had a lot of discussions, and I think staff also shared that at the next GPC, they would be able to provide an updated version, and then we can make more of an informed decision. So I think today what's being asked is it to be referred back to staff. And also, if I can just ask staff to clarify, if referral were to pass tonight, what can we potentially see at the next GPC in regards to the fundraising policy?
Through the chair, as per the motion, resolution part A, that we would provide additional options of what a mandatory option would look like for the systems priorities fund, and any legal opinion that we could gather by that time.
Thank you, through the chair. I just think having more information about different options would be really helpful. We've been hearing from our committee members, on various perspectives on this. And I think having this referred back to staff, as well as having more time to hear from committee members, would help us make more of an informed decision. So I'll be voting in favor, which would be to refer this back to staff. Thank you.
Trustee Laskin, you're next.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. This concept has been swirling now for decades. And in the ministry's fundraising guidelines, it's crystal clear. Fundraising has a designated purpose, and the proceeds are used for that purpose. It is not possible to operationalize this given the ministry's fundraising policy. I know staff will seek a legal opinion, but I am not a lawyer. But when schools do fundraising events, they do it for a designated purpose. You can't take a piece of that and move it somewhere else. It's against the principle of the fundraising policy that the ministry has. That's my first point. So allocating a percentage of fundraising money to a central fund for system priorities, from my perspective, can't be reconciled with that principle. Can't be reconciled that you're a parent or community member of a school. Clearly, when you participate in a fundraising policy, you have to know where that's going, whether it be to supplement the music program, for team jerseys, for books for the library, whatever it might be. You can't simply then take a piece of that for system priorities, because from my perspective, that completely negates the local school fundraising. That's my first point. My second point is I checked with the Ontario Public School Boards Association. No other school board has ever considered something like this, which doesn't really mean anything because we like to be first with a lot of things that we do. But I don't even know why we would refer it to staff to make work for staff, when clearly at phase 5 of a policy development that had gone through all the consultation, this is 180 degrees opposite from what the recommendations after consultation with the community gave. And then the last point I'd like to make is, I don't even clearly understand the mechanisms that we now have in some schools based upon their reports. This is yet another level of accountability that I simply don't think local schools need. And lastly, many schools that I know of absolutely, who can fundraise, absolutely have either one event or a portion of one event, or they do some other collaboration with another school to share the fact that they can with others. And we know that because that's why we differentiate resources to schools. That's why we differentiate school budgets. That's why when we get the report on fundraising, you can see how a line goes like this and a line goes like that, but when you put the two together, it equals out. So I really think this fundamentally goes against the whole policy development process that we have at the board, and I will not be supporting it. Thank you.
Next, we have Trustee Earhart.
Thanks very much. I was one of the movers of this motion, and the spirit of this remains to have to empower staff to come back with options that reflect enabling language for mandatory contributions. Having worked in charitable nonprofit sectors, I recognize that there are considerations that must always be taken for funds, and that they be directed for purpose. These are all considerations that would need to be taken into account, but I don't feel they are insurmountable. I believe there could continue to exist significant flexibility for how this could be articulated in policy. We have many things articulated with broad language and policy that are not brought forward with more specifics and procedure until there is a state of readiness within the system. We revisit this policy every 5 years, and it was something stated within the original intent of the policy process that this was an area for consideration. I do fully recognize that staff did come back with a recommendation not to consider this, but I wouldn't be reflecting what I have seen and have also heard without raising questions around the disparity in our system around these generated funds and the impacts of that when considered over time. I feel it's a modest way to give voice to this while still encouraging and promoting school-focused contributions that I know our school communities are primarily focused on. I will also note that having been through it at a school council, having been through the process of seeking these contributions, we are putting that burden without creating system supports. We are putting that burden. It's discretion, but it's also a burden on school council communities to have that discussion potentially year over year. There are options to build into bylaws. Councils would need to be supported for those kinds of models. But I mean to say that sometimes that discretion adds burden to our volunteers. And I feel that that is another way to consider this, that if articulated flexibly, it could actually facilitate the work already underway in some school councils and championing contributions beyond their school community. And it could facilitate those kinds of contributions for the many communities I know would like to recognize and do their part. So I want to invite that all as consideration. I also want to invite that I believe, irrespective of the views on Part A, that I feel there is value to Part B to include information as part of the annual report to board. I feel there's value in all of it, but I feel there would be value separate from views on A to B, which that kind of information as part of annual reporting to board would help us to better understand this area over time. And I think that would be valuable, particularly in the discussion that I heard at committee, somewhat again tonight, in terms we don't have, I don't see as concrete of a system-wide understanding on this. And just as a last point, I feel that it's important to consider system needs as well. Contributions that are sort of bilateral in nature in the donor system are not always viewed to be as preferable as system donations. So I'd add that as an invited consideration as well. And thank you very much.
Okay, Trustee Lee, you're next.
Thank you. Thank you, through you, Madam Chair. Can you hear me properly, first of all? Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Oh,
Thanks.
perfect. Thank you. I really appreciate it. First of all, thank the movers for moving this motion. Personally, I think Section B or Part B of the motion is a very good idea for us to get more understanding on how parent-generated funds are being used to support the system as a whole. But in the same time, I think Part A is not at all a good idea. I believe parent contributions are a very important part of our system. And I think it is a very material source of income that allows our system to increase the total revenue intake beyond that of which is funded by the government. And what it also allows us to do is to run equity programs that divert more system funds to schools that have more socioeconomic needs and provide comparatively less resources to schools that have robust parent-generated funding programs. And what's being proposed here through our governance and policy committee, unfortunately, are requests for options to discourage parent donations through a forced taxations on schools that have a robust parent donation program. So instead of telling our parent councils that they're doing a fantastic job in supporting our schools through their financial participation, we would be telling the parent councils that they have, or if they have worked hard enough, if they have done a good enough job, the board of TDSB trustees would roll into their schools and forcefully take the money that they have worked so hard to fundraise and redirect it somewhere else. We would essentially be telling the parents that the trustees who voted in favor of this proposal in this boardroom knows better than the parents themselves on how they should use their own donations. Now, parent council members across different wards have all reached out to me after I made my comments in GPC a short while ago to express their concerns over the possibility of a tax on donations. And I'm telling all of my colleagues today that the parents who are actually fundraising are angry at us for even considering this possibility. I believe any proposals that installs a tax of any form, either by a flat amount or a tiered levy like our income tax structure where schools that raise more money have to contribute, will reduce fundraising across our school board. And this will reduce the overall revenue intake of the TDSB and leave our system at a position that is worse off than it was before from a financial perspective. Now, through our own policy consultation process, we saw, just like our chair has mentioned, that over 60% of our community overwhelmingly told us that they do not support any type of forced contributions or forced taxations on parent donations. We don't have to ask them again. Just because we don't like the answer doesn't mean the answer is not valid. But I like the answer because I agree with them. As trustees who represent all the students in the TDSB and as individuals who owe fiduciary duty to the system as a whole, I see no reason why any of us should support this proposal that is not only detrimental to our school board's financial health, but is also overwhelmingly opposed to by our community. I believe our personal, individual political beliefs should not supersede the well-being of the TDSB as a whole. And I hope all of you, all of my colleagues, would not support Part A of this motion and would instead support a minority report that was moved by Trustee Pei and adopt the original staff recommendation of the policy, which I personally believe is very well written and very, very effective. Yeah, thank you. Through you, Madam Chair, that is all.
Okay, next up, we are on Trustee Rajwani. Please go ahead.
Thank you, through the chair. So just a couple of overarching comments from the lens of as a professional fundraiser and sharing some of the best practices that have been shared throughout the comments and questions of the trustees so far. Considering Part A of mandatory contributions, when I think of best practice of fundraising, I worry that mandatory contributions is actually limiting how much money that some of these parent councils would be willing to give to other priority areas. And my comments to staff, if this goes through and if you're coming back to consider incorporating, actually asking them to contribute, because I believe that the outcomes would be much larger and more generous in terms of that outcome. If not, the consideration of a mandatory contribution
4. Okay, trustees online, we're going to go back. We're back in session. So we're going to resume the speakers list. We're on trustee Arts.
Dennis is still here.
Thank you, Dennis.
Trustee Rajwani present.
Okay, we're actually, I think we have quorum, so we're just going to go launch right into it. Thanks.
Trustee Nunziata present.
Thank you, through you, Madam Chair. So I get the point behind asking for the information. I have similar concerns about the mandatory wording. My biggest concern is with the only thing listed in here is the Central Equity Fund. And I've said this to other trustees, and I'll say this frankly. My oldest is 21, and I've been a parent in the TDSB for all of my kids' lives, and I'm still a parent in the TDSB. And I still try to work with my schools to get them to contribute to this fund, and they won't do it. I have lots of schools that do very large equity transfers from school to school. They partner, they ask about schools in need, and they partner. They transfer a lot more money than has been discussed around this issue, but they will not consider that Central Equity Fund because it's giving the money to us. They don't see it as giving the money to need, they see them as it's giving the money to us. So that's my big problem with this. I fully support us building in mechanisms to make it easy for schools that can fundraise to participate in some sort of equity initiative, put it in place. I've worked with lots of my school councils over the years to partner them with model schools on either things they need or just straight cash transfers. And they do it in terms of 2% to 5% of what they're raising in that year for schools, giving that to schools that can't fundraise. And I've then partnered those schools up together. One school that's done it successfully for a few years, another school outreaches to say, we can't figure out how to do this. Well, here, go talk to the school over here. They've been doing it a couple years. They have some good advice for you. So it exists. There are good ways to do it. Some of my concerns with this, and just with some of the wording, is how we are structured within the TDSB. So I don't know if staff can answer this. Do we know how many school councils bank outside of the TDSB and bank outside of, it's not PACE anymore, who's our bank? Bank outside of our bank? Do we know how many school council bank accounts there are out there in the world? Do we know how many school councils, do we know how much it would cost to collect? I saw some amounts of money bantered about, but do you know how much money it would cost us to collect and report on that money? Like Trustee Laskin said, because this comes under the ministry's fundraising policy, we would have to report on every dollar that's transferred to us, report out. And that would be a very large amount of staff time for what looks to me like a much smaller amount of money than my schools are already transferring. Do we collect information on equity transfers between schools? So I understand from staff that we do collect information when a school transfers money into the system's priority fund, but as I said, my schools aren't doing that. They're transferring it, they're doing equity transfers directly to other schools. So do we collect that information? I'd like to understand that.
I'm not sure who she's asking. Was the question to, who was the question to?
I guess the question would be to staff. Do we know how many school council bank accounts there are out there? How many bank inside and outside the TDSB? Approximate how much work and cost would it be to collect kind of the small amounts of money that were alluded to and report on those amounts of money? And do we collect money, or do we collect information about equity transfers between schools?
Through you, Madam Chair, we do, I don't have the information type, but we do know how many schools are banking with our approved bank. We know schools that are approved banking outside of that. So we can provide that information to trustees through Trustee Weekly if they like it. We do know that this school year, one school council contributed to the equity fund. We do not have pure sight as to school transfers. We are aware of some, but we don't have a current mechanism to capture that. But it's something that in Part B, if it passes, we would be able to start endeavoring to do.
Thank you. Okay, are you done, Trustee Arts? Okay, so next up we have Trustee King, followed by Trustee Shen, Pei, and Rajwani.
Thank you, through the chair. I have a couple of questions as to understand what I'll be considering. In Part A, the options for mandatory contributions, is this asking for options as to what kind of items would be within the fund, or is it asking for options as to what the models or threshold of giving would be? I guess that's a question for the movers.
So I think that question is for Trustee Sriskandarajah and Earhart.
Through the chair, could the question be repeated?
Yes, through the chair, I'm just asking if we are seeking options for what type of items would be included within a systems priority fund, or if we're seeking options for what a model or threshold of the giving would be.
So I can invite my perspective on that, and Trustee Sriskandarajah, please feel free to join in as well. For me, it's options on all of that. What was, as staff had not put forward a recommendation in this area, we as a committee did not see clear staff articulation on any of this. So I feel like it could and should be interpreted as being as open-ended as would be supportive of sound decision making for our system. I hope that's helpful.
Through the chair, it is. Thank you. My next question through the chair is for staff. I'd like to understand, during the consultation process, in discussions of the possibility of a mandatory contribution, were the public provided with examples, different models of what a mandatory contribution could look like? Or was it more of a general discussion without the benefit of actual models to consider?
Through the chair, a brief example of what a system priorities fund was given, and it was a survey that was responded by 323 people. That survey then asked whether or not, based on that description, if there is support for a system priorities fund, and approximately 2/3 had support for a systems priorities fund as a concept. And then it asked if we're to proceed with a system priorities fund, would you prefer that is voluntary or mandatory in terms of contributions from your school council to the system priorities fund? So it didn't go into exactly what that mandatory would be. It gets very nuanced in terms of putting that out as a question. So really, we just wanted to see make sure they're aware of the system priorities fund and what it could do. Are you in support of it? And then B, do you support that being voluntary or mandatory?
Through the chair, thank you. So I understand that there would have been question about interest in a mandatory, but folks might have had their own impressions or ideas of what that might look like practically. That wasn't concretely discussed. My next question, also for staff, is I'd like to understand whether the fundraising history or capacity of a school is ever a factor in resource allocation.
Through you, Madam Chair, no, the resource allocation that we do for school budgets has no indicator of the fundraising capability of the school. We do provide in the report we did in February to the FBAC committee. We do show the fundraising in the school budgets, and we do compare the two together. And as I believe Trustee Lassen said earlier, it's a relatively flat line.
Through the chair, thank you for that. So I think I just want to add a couple of comments because I really do see the way inequities are exacerbated by very vast range in fundraising capacity within my ward. I recognize that that might not be the case in every ward, but the way that I'm composed, my ward is composed, I have schools that fundraise 10 times the amount that another school might. So it really is a vast difference. I don't entirely agree with the interpretation from Trustee Laskin, and I'd be interested to hear from staff and from legal on what the expectation and limitations of the fundraising are, because I could interpret and see a scenario where a school makes a very intentional decision at the start of the year that there's a specific project that they would like to fundraise for and that they would also like to make a contribution to another community. I think that's something a school could decide. And I don't think that that would be deviating from the rules and the way that I interpret it, but I'd be interested to hear what staff have to say there. I also just want to say that I really respect the many ways that our families contribute to our schools. We have families that contribute the capacity of time that they have. They spend time cooking, they spend time gardening, they spend time watching children and arranging for other outings. We have families that bring their skill sets and their capacity in that way to the work that they do. And we have other families that have networks and pockets that they can reach into for donations. So I really just want to emphasize that I think many families are working hard in many different ways to support their schools. And I think we need to be very careful about the kind of language that we use that suggests that some families are working harder at it and therefore able to contribute more. I have seen examples where schools do have a surplus of funds. There's very much an interest in sharing with other communities. They want to be able to pass on that wealth. I've seen examples where they are looking for guidance in how to do that. They don't necessarily have agreement among their councils, and having some direction that's already outlined for them would actually be helpful, would take some of that burden off of them, like we heard from Trustee Earhart earlier. So I do support this motion. I think just having the conversations about what it could look like and what is possible, I think is a valuable conversation to have. So thank you.
Vice Chair Shan, you're next.
Thank you. And as Trustee Laskin began, this has been going on for a long time. And I think one of the things that I wanted to kind of, the concept of mandatory contribution sometimes it strikes me as kind of some sort of a oxymoron in some ways. And, it's important to frame this in a way that it doesn't look like it is something more than what it is. I also want to caution the idea of a neighboring school contributing to another school. Let's remember that stigma and the kind of charity mindset and the kind of reproduction of colonial structures, reproduction of ways in which control gets exerted and so on. So it has to be done carefully without saying, this school is funding this school and how that could. So I do understand kind of centralized mechanism might be a better way, or a community-based mechanism. I suppose a family of school based mechanism could say to people that you're supporting schools nearby or feeder school and so on. I think so the charity model with this money, which is not it's not significant at the end of the day. The numbers I'm looking at is not going to break the inequities that exist in some of these schools with that money, but it needs to be carefully constructed. I think the bigger conversation needs to be about how do we level the playing field around fundraising. I can imagine a structure in which somebody, in many donation circles, if you're donating $10,000 through an online portal, there is a significant amount of money that's held back. If TDSB is going to be helping fundraise or TDSB's charitable status is being used and so on, there is potential to have larger sums to be accounted for the charitable function of TDSB, which includes supporting equity-based students. And so there are ways in which people who are rich will know that that is a standard process than to say, out of your $10,000, 500 is going to be taken or 250 is going to be taken for an equity-based thing. The other way to address some of these is to kind of look at vendors who can actually do staggered type of services. If you're going to do barbecue in a school that already has 50,000, as a staggered thing, you could actually find vendors and maybe encourage those vendors who can do pro bono in areas as opposed to and find ways. I think we have to think about. I know it'll take some more time, it'll take some more effort to do some of these things, but it's important to look outside to level the playing field around fundraising. And the fundraising is part of community engagement in smaller communities and smaller schools, so we need to also make sure that it's not by the amount of value that they bring through fundraising, but among the engagement that some of these initiatives have. And going back to Trustee King's comment, the social accounting part of many of these places where actually in many low-income families, instead of raising money and hiring somebody, many of them are volunteering to do some of those work, which adds to a lot more money as well. So how do we make sure that this happens? How do we make sure that some of those schools that are raising a lot of money can share their contacts? Because if they are hooked in with a basketball player who can come or a guest speaker who can come in because they're their friends, would they be willing to tell that person, here is a school that might benefit from you showing up and do it as part of your goodwill and the kind of giving back a corporation. So those things will go a long way than the money we will get by having this small amount of money that is being raised. But I think one of the last thing I want to also talk about is what is fundraising being used for? If they're being used for essentials, and you see different types of schools everywhere, some of the communities may not even have the incentive to advocate for better funding from province. Because the schools look much different, the resources look much different, they have wraparound structures. So it's important to contextualize that some of these essentials have to come from the provincial government, and some of these things that are mandatory needed for education needs to be a universal thing. So if you have limitations on those things being used within the school, then obviously they will know that they cannot go ahead and do something that significantly advantages a particular community because of the wealth that exists, and therefore reduces the amount of funding that comes from provincial government. So I think all of these considerations needs to be taken. So that's why I'll support this motion to refer and have these conversations a bit more and come back with some options that can do this work better.
I just want to pause for 1 minute. Can we go into recess for 1 minute? Thank you. We have are we in recess?